What happens when the wrong man shows up to the right date and accidentally becomes the one she never knew she needed? Nathan Carter was never supposed to be there. He was a substitute, a stand-in, a man who smelled like cinnamon and couldn't afford the restaurant's cheapest wine. Victoria Langford was never supposed to stay. She was a billionaire with a schedule tighter than a courtroom oath and zero patience for wasted evenings. One night, one misunderstanding, one conversation that neither of them could walk away from cleanly. This is their story. It wasn't smooth, it wasn't easy, and it almost didn't happen at all. If this story moves you, hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The bread had burned that morning. Not catastrophically, just enough at the corners that Nathan had to trim the loaves before setting them in the display case. And even then, the dark edges showed if you looked too closely. He looked too closely. He always did. "It's fine," said Delia, his part-time employee and the closest thing he had to a work friend, as she refilled the sugar dispensers along the counter. "Customers don't care about burned corners." "I care about burned corners," Nathan said, setting the last loaf down and standing back to examine the case. "You care about everything too much. That's your problem." "That's everybody's problem." "No," Delia said, clicking the lid back onto the sugar. "It's specifically yours." He didn't argue. Arguing with Delia before 9 in the morning was a project he'd abandoned 2 years ago, around the same time he'd hired her and discovered she had a way of being right that made you feel worse than if she'd been wrong. The bakery was called Carter's. Not creative, not elegant, just honest. And it sat on the corner of Maplewood and 5th in a neighborhood that had been slowly gentrifying for a decade without ever quite finishing the job. The building was old brick, the kind that sweated in summer and breathed cold in winter. The floors were original hardwood, scratched in patterns that told the history of every cart, stool, and clumsy customer who'd passed through since 1987. When Nathan's father had opened the place as a sandwich shop before it became a bakery, before it became Nathan's. He'd inherited it at 26 when his father retired to Florida. He hadn't planned on it. He'd had other plans, vague ones, the kind you carry around in your 20s without ever examining too carefully. But then his father's knees gave out, and his mother refused to let a stranger take the place. And Nathan had said fine, just for a year, and somehow 6 years had passed. Now he was 32, the bakery was barely breaking even, and his daughter Lily was 7 years old and obsessed with a cartoon about a hedgehog detective that Nathan had been forced to watch approximately 400 times. His life was not glamorous. He knew that. He'd made peace with it, mostly. The morning rush came and went. Regulars, mostly. Mr. Okafor, who ordered a plain croissant every day and complained every day that they weren't as good as Paris, where he'd been twice. The young woman from the apartment building 2 blocks north, who always got 2 of the bear claws and pretended they were both for herself, even though Nathan had seen the ring on her finger. A cluster of construction workers who descended on the counter every day at 7:15 like a weather event and wiped out the cinnamon rolls. By 10, the crowd thinned. Nathan wiped down the counter and started thinking about the afternoon batch. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. He picked it up. 3 missed calls from his brother Marcus, followed by a text that read, "Bro, call me." Now, this is not a joke. I'm serious. Call Me Marcus was the kind of person who considered everything a crisis, so Nathan finished wiping the counter before dialing. But when Marcus picked up, his voice was wrong, thin, ragged, with a quality Nathan hadn't heard since their father's knee surgery. "I'm in the hospital," Marcus said. "Don't freak out." Nathan immediately freaked out. "What happened?" "Appendix, they think. They're still running tests, but the doctor says it's probably appendicitis and they might need to do surgery tonight." "Are you serious? Do I sound like I'm joking?" He didn't. "Which hospital? I'll come." "No, don't come. I'm fine. It's not—" "Listen, that's not why I called. I need a favor. A big one. I need you to go somewhere for me tonight." Nathan leaned against the counter. "Marcus, I had a dinner. A date. It's a setup thing. My friend Derek arranged it. The woman he's been trying to get me to meet for like 3 months. Derek says she's incredible, but also kind of intimidating, whatever that means. And I was supposed to meet her tonight at this restaurant downtown, and I can't exactly show up with an IV in my arm. So cancel. I can't just cancel. Derek's been vouching for me for months. This woman has like a 2-week schedule. She doesn't just reschedule things. This was a huge deal for Derek to even get her to agree to. Look, I'm not asking you to go on the date. I'm asking you to go there, explain what happened, apologize on my behalf, and leave. That's it. 20 minutes. You sit down, you say sorry, you go home. Nathan looked around the bakery, at the burned-edged loaves in the case, at the smudge on the pastry display he'd missed when wiping, at the pile of invoices sitting on the back counter that he kept meaning to go through. I have to pick up Lily at 3, he said. This is at 7. You'll be done by 7:30, I promise. Marcus, Nathan, his brother's voice dropped. I'm in a hospital bed. I'm about to potentially have surgery. I need you to do this one thing. Which was how, at 7:15 on a Thursday evening, Nathan Carter found himself standing outside Elara, one of those downtown restaurants where the menus had no prices, and the lighting was designed to make everyone look like they belonged somewhere important, wearing the nicest thing he owned, a dark blue blazer that fit well in the shoulders and less well everywhere else, and wondering how quickly he could get this over with. He gave his name at the host stand, or rather, he gave Marcus's name because he realized only as he said it that he didn't actually know which name the reservation was under. Carter, party of 2, he said, adding a slight question mark at the end. The host, young, composed, the kind of person who made you feel underdressed by breathing near you, checked the tablet. Right this way. He was led through the restaurant, past tables of people who all seemed to be having important conversations in quiet voices, past a bar where the bottles were arranged like an art installation, to a table in a corner near the window. The woman was already there. Nathan almost stopped walking. He didn't know what he'd expected. He hadn't actually thought about it. The whole thing had been so rushed that he'd spent the drive over rehearsing his apology rather than imagining the person he'd be apologizing to. He'd pictured, vaguely, someone pleasant, someone who would nod, accept the apology graciously, and let him leave. The woman at the table was not vaguely pleasant. She was 30 maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a way that was either effortlessly casual or extremely calculated, and the kind of face that made you aware you were looking at it. Not because it was conventionally beautiful, though it was, but because there was something sharp about it, watchful, the expression of someone who had spent a lot of time in rooms reading people before they could read her. She wore a charcoal blazer over a silk top the color of deep water, and she was holding a glass of sparkling water with both hands, looking at her phone with a small, vertical line between her brows. She looked up. For approximately 1 second, the expression on her face was completely readable. She had expected someone else. Then the expression disappeared, replaced by something measured and polite, and she set her phone face down on the table. "Marcus Carter?" she asked. "No," Nathan said. And then, because that was a terrible way to start. No, I'm Nathan, Marcus's brother. He's in the hospital. Appendix, possible appendicitis. They might do surgery tonight. He couldn't come and he couldn't reach you directly to cancel because apparently your schedule is... He stopped. "I'm sorry. I'm not making this sound better than it is. I came to apologize on his behalf and to tell you he's genuinely sorry. That's all." He hadn't sat down. He was still standing beside the table like a waiter who'd forgotten to deliver something. The woman looked at him for a moment. "Is he okay?" she asked. Nathan blinked. Yeah, he thinks so. They're running tests." "That sounds unpleasant." "It is. I've never had appendicitis, but from what I understand, it's not a great time." Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. More like a smile considering applying for a visa. "Well," she said, "I'm sorry to hear that." She picked up her sparkling water and took a sip, then looked at the table, then back at Nathan. "You can sit down if you want. The waiter will be back in a minute, and it's less complicated if you're seated." Nathan looked at the chair across from her. "I don't want to take up your evening." "You're not taking up my evening. Derek canceled his reservation when he found out Marcus was in the hospital, and my driver isn't picking me up for another 40 minutes. So," she gestured at the chair, "sit, unless standing is a strong preference." He sat. Her name was Victoria Langford, though she said it the way most people say their names. Like information being exchanged, not a title being announced. Nathan wouldn't find out until later how well known that name was. In that moment, she was just a woman at a table who asked him questions like she actually wanted the answers. "So you're the brother?" she said. "What do you do?" "I run a bakery." "What kind of bakery?" "The kind with bread and pastries. Pretty traditional setup." "Where?" "Maplewood and Fifth. You probably don't know it." "I don't, but I know that corner." She looked at the menu briefly, then set it down. "How long have you had it?" 6 years. It was my dad's before that. He had it as a sandwich place for about 15 years before converting it." "Do you like it?" The question was simple. People usually asked, "How's business?" or "Is it profitable?" or "What's your plan for scaling?" The practical questions that assumed you were running a bakery the way you'd run any other project. No one usually asked if he liked it. "Most days," he said honestly. "Some days I wonder what I'm doing, but most days, yeah, I like it." She nodded. "That's a better ratio than most people get." "What do you do?" he asked, and realized half a second later that maybe he should have already known, that maybe there was something obvious he was missing. "I run a company," she said. "A few, technically. Investment and development, mostly." "Do you like it?" She looked at him. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. "Most days," she said, and then quieter. "Less than I used to." The waiter appeared. Nathan, who had not planned to stay, found himself looking at the menu. Victoria ordered a salad and a small plate of pasta without consulting the menu, the way people order at restaurants they go to often. Nathan ordered the first thing his eyes landed on that didn't have ingredients he couldn't pronounce, which turned out to be a roasted chicken dish that arrived later looking significantly more intimidating than he'd expected. "That's a serious chicken," Victoria observed. "I wasn't prepared for how much chicken it would be." "You could ask them to box it." "I feel like that would be rude." "It's not rude, it's practical." "There's a lot of food philosophy I apparently need to update." She laughed at that, actually laughed. Not the polished social laugh he'd been half expecting, but something real and brief that she seemed slightly surprised by. She picked up her fork and stabbed a piece of pasta with more force than necessary, and Nathan got the impression she didn't laugh like that very often in restaurants like this one. He started cutting the chicken. 40 minutes dissolved without either of them noticing. They talked about the neighborhood. She knew more about the development history of Maplewood than he did, which embarrassed him slightly. They talked about the way cities change and who benefits and who doesn't. She had opinions, sharp ones, and she didn't soften them for politeness, but she also listened when he pushed back, which he found himself doing twice. "You disagree," she said the second time, and she didn't sound annoyed. She sounded interested. "I think you're right about the economics, but wrong about the people," he said. "Development does what you're describing on paper. On the street, it looks different. I've watched 3 other shops close in my block in 6 years because the rent went up after the building sold, and those were people who'd been there for 20-plus years. The economics worked out for someone, not for them." She was quiet for a moment. "You're right," she said. "That's a fair point." He hadn't expected her to concede it that quickly or that cleanly. He'd been braced for the redirect, the "yeah, but," the pivot to bigger picture statistics. She just said "you're right," like it cost her nothing. He liked that. They talked about Lily, briefly. Victoria asked, when he mentioned picking his daughter up, whether she was good at school, and he said she was exceptional at math and catastrophically bad at sitting still, and Victoria said she had been the same way and that sitting still was overrated. "How old?" Victoria asked. 7. Tough age. Every age is a tough age. That's either very wise or very pessimistic. "I think it's both," Nathan said. She smiled again. The second real smile. He was, he realized, counting them. By the time the waiter appeared to ask if they wanted dessert, Nathan glanced at his watch and felt a small, inexplicable drop of disappointment to discover it was nearly 9 o'clock. "I should get home," he said. "Lily's with my neighbor, and she—" "Of course." Victoria was already signaling for the check. This was unexpected. "Yeah." He searched for the right word. "In a good way, I think." She looked at him across the table, and for a second the measured expression was entirely gone, and she looked like someone who had been handed something she wasn't sure what to do with. In a good way, she agreed. They argued briefly about the check. She won, efficiently and without drama, producing a card that seemed to materialize from nowhere and disappearing it again before Nathan could protest effectively. "You didn't have to. You drove here to apologize on your brother's behalf," she said. "That's worth a meal." "That logic doesn't hold up." "I have an MBA. My logic always holds up." He laughed. Outside, the night air was cool and smelled like a city after rain, that particular combination of wet pavement and exhaust and food that Nathan associated with Thursday evenings. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, which was strange because there was no reason to stand on the sidewalk. "Carter's Bakery," she said. "Maplewood and 5th. "That's the one." She nodded once, like she was filing the information somewhere specific. "Take care of yourself, Nathan Carter," she said. "You too, Victoria." He paused. He realized she hadn't given her last name. Or had she? He couldn't remember. "Langford," she said. "Victoria Langford." She got into a black car that appeared so promptly it seemed like it had been waiting around the corner, which it probably had, and the door closed, and Nathan stood on the sidewalk for a moment looking at the place where the car had been. He drove home thinking about the conversation in that involuntary, catching way, replaying pieces of it, the way she'd laughed, the way she'd said "you're right" without any of the usual social scaffolding around the concession. He got home. His neighbor, Mrs. Park, reported that Lily had eaten 2 bowls of soup and then staged an elaborate protest about bedtime involving 3 stuffed animals and a highly specific grievance about the position of her nightlight. The stuffed animals had been accommodated. The grievance had been ruled inadmissible. He paid Mrs. Park and went into Lily's room and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his daughter sleep in the chaotic nest of blankets she always made, one arm thrown over the edge of the bed, her hair across her face. He stood there thinking that this, the bakery, the burned edges, the construction workers, and the 7-year-old in the Thursday evenings, was his life. All of it real. All of it his. And also thinking about a woman at a table who had laughed like she was surprised she was doing it. He didn't check Google until the next morning. He was wiping down the display case, the bakery not yet open, coffee cooling on the counter, when some impulse he didn't entirely examine made him type Victoria Langford into his phone. The results loaded. He set the coffee down. Victoria Langford, 30, CEO of Langford Capital and founding partner of VL Development Group, named to Forbes 30 Under 30 at 27, currently oversees a portfolio valued at... He stopped reading. He put his phone in his apron pocket. He stood very still for a moment. Then he went back to wiping down the display case, though now his movements were slightly more forceful than the situation required. She hadn't mentioned any of that. Not once. She just said, "I run a company." A few, technically. Like it was nothing. Like it was the most ordinary thing. He thought about the way she'd laughed when she said she had an MBA. He thought about the check disappearing before he could protest. He thought about the black car that had appeared exactly on cue. Of course, he thought, not bitterly, just factually. Of course, that's who she was. He thought about how he'd corrected her on the economics of neighborhood development, and she'd sat there and said, "You're right," and he'd liked that about her. He pulled his phone out again and stared at the Forbes article photo. Victoria in a suit at some kind of conference podium, looking like a different person from the woman who'd stabbed her pasta too hard and told him sitting still was overrated. Delia arrived at 6:50 and found him standing there with his phone. "You look weird," she said. "What happened?" "Nothing," he said, pocketing the phone. "I had that thing for my brother last night." "How'd that go?" "He has appendicitis, so..." "Not great for him. What about you?" Nathan turned back to the display case. "Fine," he said. It was fine. He told himself that was true. He told himself the dinner was a funny story. Wrong man, blind date, billionaire, what are the odds? And that was all it was, and he'd probably never see her again. And that was fine. That was entirely fine. Marcus had surgery on Friday. It went well. He texted Nathan from the recovery room with 3 fire emojis and a selfie that Nathan found deeply unnecessary given the circumstances. On Saturday, while pulling the morning batch of sourdough, Nathan's phone lit up with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer. He usually didn't answer unknown numbers, but something made him, he couldn't have said what, some low-frequency instinct he'd learned not to ignore. "Nathan Carter?" said the voice on the other end. He recognized it immediately. He stood there in his bakery holding a loaf of sourdough with both oven-mitted hands, flour on his cheek, and probably everywhere else, and said, "Yeah, this is Nathan." "This is Victoria Langford," she said. "I got your number from Derek, who got it from Marcus. I hope that's not intrusive." No, it's fine. I wanted to check in about your brother. How is he?" He told her about the surgery, about the fire emojis, about the recovery. She laughed at the selfie story. Then there was a brief pause. "I also," she said, and her voice shifted slightly, a half-degree cooler like she was reading something prepared, "wanted to say that Thursday evening was a more interesting dinner than I've had in a long time. Not that the bar was high." "The bar was low?" "The bar's been in the floor for approximately 18 months. I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be. You raised it considerably." Another pause. The sourdough was still in his hands. He'd forgotten about it. "I was wondering," she said, "if you would tell me more about the bakery. Your father's history with it. You mentioned the conversion from sandwich shop, and I realized afterward I'd asked you to stop talking about it so we could move to something else. And I've been thinking about that." Nathan set the sourdough down on the rack. "You've been thinking about my dad's sandwich shop?" "I think about things that interest me. Most people's interests lean toward things that are more," he searched for the word, "professionally relevant. Most people's interests are professionally relevant because that's all they let themselves think about," she said, with a flatness that sounded like something she'd worked out a long time ago. "That gets boring." Nathan leaned against the back counter and looked at the bakery. The racks, the warm light, the first customers starting to gather at the door outside. "Come in sometime," he said. "I'll show you." A beat. "Carter's Bakery," she said. "Maplewood and 5th. That's the one." "I'll find it." She hung up. Nathan stood there for a second with the phone in his hand, then walked over and unlocked the front door and let the morning in. She came on a Tuesday, the following week, at 9:15. He knew it was her before he turned around, which didn't make sense because her footsteps weren't distinctive, and the bell above the door rang the same way for everyone. He just knew. She was dressed differently than at the restaurant, still polished, the way some people just are regardless of what they're wearing, but more casual. A light jacket, dark jeans, a bag that probably cost more than Nathan's oven, but was worn with the ease of something she didn't think about. She stood in the entrance for a moment with the look of someone who'd just walked somewhere and was giving the place a chance to be what they hoped it was. The bakery smelled, as it always did in the morning, of fresh bread and cinnamon and the particular sweetness of pastry butter warming in the case. The light came through the front windows at an angle that turned the dust motes into brief gold. Victoria breathed it in. "This is the place," she said. Not a question. This is the place. She walked to the counter and looked at the display case with genuine attention, the way a person looks when they're actually deciding rather than just performing the act of choosing. She asked what the morning specialty was. He told her it was the cardamom pear Danish, that he'd adjusted the recipe 3 times this month, trying to get the cardamom ratio right, and this was the version he was most confident in. "I'll have one of those," she said, "and a coffee, black." He made the coffee while Delia, who had clocked Victoria's entrance from across the room with the subtle radar of someone who notices everything, gave Nathan a very significant look from the far end of the counter. He ignored it with practiced efficiency. He brought the Danish and the coffee and set them on the table by the window, the one with the best morning light, without asking if she wanted to sit. She sat. Delia materialized beside Nathan almost immediately. "Who is that?" she said quietly. "A customer," Nathan said. "Nathan. A customer I met last week. She's wearing a watch that costs more than this building." Nathan glanced involuntarily at the table. He couldn't see the watch from here. "You don't know that." "I looked it up." "You looked up her watch." I looked up her. Victoria Langford. Nathan, why is Victoria Langford eating a cardamom pear Danish at our counter? I told you. Because she wants to, Delia said, answering her own question. She could eat anywhere in this city. She's here because she wants to be here. She looked at Nathan with an expression he found difficult to categorize. Interesting? Don't, Nathan said. I'm not doing anything. You're doing something. I'm standing here. This is where I stand. She picked up a cloth and started wiping the counter. Go talk to her. I have things to do. The croissants are in. The sourdoughs won't be ready for an hour. The morning rush is over. You have nothing to do. She looked at him. Go. He went. Not because Delia told him to, but because he'd been wanting to since Victoria walked in the door and had been finding reasons not to. He pulled out the chair across from her. Mind if I sit for a minute? She was looking at him with an expression that said she'd been waiting for him to ask. The cardamom ratio, she said, holding up the Danish. It's better. You don't have anything to compare it to. I have a good palate and a decent imagination. It's better. She took another bite. Your father, tell me about the conversion. So he did. He told her about his father, a man named Robert Carter, who had run the sandwich shop with a philosophy of enough food, enough warmth, enough consistency that people came back, and who had converted to a bakery in 2005, not because of market research or a business strategy, but because a woman named Dolores, who had been coming in every Thursday for a turkey club, had mentioned offhandedly that she'd been trying for years to find a bakery that sold a proper apple galette, and Robert had gone home that night and started teaching himself. Did Dolores like the galette? Victoria asked. She said it was too sweet. He worked on it for a year. She died before he got it right. Victoria put down the Danish. He still makes the galette, Nathan said. He makes it in Florida, for my mother, every fall. He got it right eventually. Victoria was quiet for a moment. That's a specific kind of persistence. My dad's a specific kind of person. She looked at the bakery, at the walls, the shelves, the chalkboard menu Nathan updated every week in handwriting that was not good, but was honest. You kept his sensibility. I kept his flour supplier too. He made me promise. Is that sentimental or practical? He said it was practical. I think it was both. She smiled. Not the polished one, the real one, the one that used the muscles around her eyes. I think your dad is interesting. I'll tell him a billionaire said so. He said it before thinking, and he saw something shift in her expression, just briefly, just a flicker, the way a person reacts when a word they don't entirely love has been dropped into a conversation. I'm sorry, he said. That came out. No, she said. Don't apologize. It's just... She paused, looking at her coffee cup. Sometimes I forget that's the first thing. The first thing? The first thing people think when they find out. She looked up. It's the thing that reorganizes everything they already thought. Nathan looked at her across the table. She was right, and he knew she was right, because it had happened to him too. He'd stood in his bakery holding sourdough bread and read a Forbes article and felt the conversation shift in his memory, recategorize, become something different from what it had been. Did it reorganize things for you? She asked. When you found out? A little, he said honestly. How? He considered lying. It would have been easier. I wondered if I'd been reading the conversation wrong. Like, maybe you were just being, I don't know, gracious. You thought I was humoring you. The thought occurred. And now? He looked at the Danish, at the way she'd actually eaten it without the performative restraint some people applied to pastry in public. At the way she was sitting, slightly sideways in the chair like someone who didn't spend enough time being comfortable and wasn't sure how to hold the position. No, he said. I don't think that anymore. She held his gaze for a second, then looked back at the window. Outside, a group of children walked past in a line, probably from the elementary school 2 blocks down, their voices filtering through the glass as a muffled brightness. I should let you get back to work, she said. You don't have to go. I have a call at 10:30. Of course you do. She laughed. The real one. The third one. I have a lot of calls. I don't have any calls, Nathan said. I have bread. That sounds like the better morning. Come back and I'll let you have more Danish. She stood, pulling her jacket straight. The cardamom ratio, she said. Work on it a little more. It's close, but not perfect. You said it was better. Better and perfect are different thresholds. She picked up her bag. I'll be back. She said it simply, without drama, as a statement of fact. And she was. Said. She came back the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. By the fourth Tuesday, Delia had stopped giving Nathan significant looks and started giving him direct instructions. You should ask her to stay for lunch, she said, one morning as Nathan watched Victoria finish the last of her coffee. She has calls. She has calls every day, and she's here for 40 minutes every week. Ask her to stay for lunch. We don't do lunch. We have bread. Bread is lunch. Ask her. He didn't ask that day. But the following Tuesday, when Victoria arrived at 9 and showed no signs of having a pressing engagement, Nathan found himself saying, without entirely planning to, I usually do a staff lunch around noon, nothing fancy, just whatever's left from the morning and usually some soup. If you... Yes, she said, wanted to stay, you'd be... He stopped. Yes? Yes, I'd like to stay. He'd made potato leek soup that morning, one of the things he'd started doing on Tuesdays after Delia pointed out that they usually had bread odds and ends that were good for exactly one more use. He set 2 bowls on the small table in the back, not the customer area, the actual back, where the light came in through a high window, and the wall still had the pencil mark his father had made measuring Nathan's height when he was 9. Victoria looked at the pencil mark. That's you? She asked. At 9. My dad marked it every birthday here until I was too tall for the wall. She touched it with 2 fingers. Where did you go after the wall? Door frame in the office. I was 6'3" by the time I stopped growing. He was very proud of that. Were you? I kept hitting my head on things. She laughed and sat down, and Nathan sat across from her, and they ate potato leek soup in the back room of the bakery with the high window light and the old pencil marks. And Nathan thought he couldn't remember the last time he'd sat down for a meal in his own bakery without thinking about the next batch, the invoices, the delivery that was coming, the thing he'd forgotten. He just sat there. She told him about her week, not in the abstract corporate way of someone summarizing achievements, but in the specific, slightly exhausted way of someone who had been in 5 cities in 4 days and couldn't find the restaurant she'd wanted and ended up eating a gas station sandwich somewhere in Philadelphia. A gas station sandwich, Nathan said. It was actually fine. What kind? Turkey Club. She looked up. Which I realize is ironic given what you just told me about your father's sandwich shop. Nathan stared at her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. It's just... He shook his head. That's a weird coincidence. Is it? He told her about Dolores and the Thursday Turkey Club and the apple galette. Victoria listened with her soup spoon in her hand, not eating, just listening. When he finished, she said, She's why the bakery exists. In a way. 1 turkey club on a Thursday, she said quietly, and you're sitting here. She looked around the back room. Everything has such a long tail. Is that good or bad? She thought about it. Both, she said, usually both. They ate in silence for a minute, but it was the comfortable kind, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Lily, Victoria said. Tell me about Lily. He did. He told her about the hedgehog detective obsession, about the math talent and the inability to sit still, about the way Lily had started demanding to help him in the bakery on Saturday mornings, mostly by eating dough and telling Nathan he was doing it wrong. She's not wrong, Victoria said. She's 7. 7-year-olds are very often right about the things that matter. She has opinions about the cinnamon rolls. What are her opinions? More cinnamon, more icing, more everything. She's right. Not you too. Victoria was grinning, a real one, not measured, just present. Bring her sometime, she said, if she wants to come. To a Tuesday lunch? Or whenever. She looked at him across the table, steady and direct. I'd like to meet her. Nathan looked at this woman, this billionaire, this Forbes profile, this person who had a black car that appeared on cue and a schedule like a legal contract, sitting in the back room of his family's bakery, eating potato leek soup and asking to meet his 7-year-old. He didn't know what to do with her. He didn't know what to do with any of this. But he found himself saying, okay, quietly and without ceremony, because it was the honest answer, and he was, at the end of the day, his father's son. And his father had always said that the honest answer was the only one worth giving. That evening, he picked up Lily from Mrs. Parks, and Lily, as was her custom, delivered a 20-minute debrief about her day covering topics including, but not limited to, a new episode of The Hedgehog Detective, a disagreement about whose turn it was to be line leader, a bug she had found in the schoolyard and named Gerald, and a highly technical analysis of why mashed potatoes were inferior to roasted potatoes in almost every metric. Nathan listened to all of it. He made dinner. Nothing impressive, pasta with a simple sauce, the kind of meal that appeared without effort because he'd made it 300 times. He sat across from his daughter at their small kitchen table and watched her eat with the concentrated commitment she brought to everything, and he thought about what Victoria had said. Everything has such a long tail. Dolores and the turkey club and the galette and his father's flour supplier and the pencil mark on the wall. Lily's mother, who had left when Lily was 2. A fact that had broken Nathan in a specific and complicated way that he'd spent 4 years quietly reassembling. The bakery, which he'd taken over because his father's knees gave out, which his father had started because a woman asked for something she couldn't find. And Marcus, getting appendicitis on a Thursday, and a restaurant Nathan had never been to, and a woman at a table who laughed like she was surprised. Long tails. "Dad," Lily said around a mouthful of pasta. "Don't talk with your mouth full." She swallowed elaborately. "Dad, do we know anyone who's really, really rich?" Nathan paused. "What do you mean?" "Like billionaire rich. Maya at school says her uncle knows a billionaire." "Does he?" "She says so." "I don't know if I believe her." Lily pushed a piece of pasta around her plate. "Are billionaires nice?" Nathan thought about potato leek soup and a pencil mark on a wall. "Some of them," he said. "The same as everyone else. Some are nice, some aren't." Lily considered this with the gravity she applied to important questions. "Do you know any?" "Maybe one," he said, and left it at that, and watched his daughter go back to her pasta, and thought that the world was, in fact, very strange and very small, and had a habit of surprising you in the back rooms of the things you already knew. The Tuesdays became a thing, not an official thing, not a scheduled thing. Nobody said "I will see you next Tuesday" with any kind of commitment behind it. It just happened, the way certain habits form without being chosen. Victoria arrived at 9:15, ordered the cardamom pear Danish and a black coffee, sat at the window table for somewhere between 30 and 90 minutes, depending on what her morning held, and left. Sometimes Nathan sat with her. Sometimes he couldn't, and she sat alone and read something on her phone with the focused quiet of someone who had learned to extract stillness from whatever container was available. By the 6th Tuesday, Delia had stopped noting it entirely and simply started putting a Danish aside when she arrived in the morning. She did not tell Nathan she was doing this. He noticed when the case count started coming up one short and figured it out. "You're holding one for her," he said one morning, not accusingly. "I'm holding one for a customer," Delia said. "For a specific customer. For a loyal customer. That's good business practice." She looked at him over the top of the pastry case. "Is that a problem?" It wasn't a problem. Nathan went back to the bread. The thing that happened slowly, the way the best and worst things usually do, was that Victoria started staying longer. Not dramatically. It wasn't like one Tuesday she arrived and announced she'd cleared her schedule. It was incremental. The 9:15 visit stretched toward 10, then 10:30. And there was one Tuesday in November when Nathan looked up from the back counter at 11:45 and found her still at the window table, her coffee cup empty, and her jacket hung over the back of her chair, talking to a regular named Hector about whether baseball or football was the superior sport for radio listening. Nathan stood in the doorway to the back room watching this happen. Hector was 71 years old, retired from the Postal Service, and had opinions about sports broadcasting that he shared with anyone who stayed still long enough. Nathan had heard the baseball versus football argument approximately 40 times. He could predict every beat of it. He watched Victoria listen to Hector with the same attention she'd given Nathan in the back room, the same quality of actual engagement, Not polite nodding, not scanning the room, just listening like the answer might be worth something. Football, she said, when Hector paused. But only because the pace forces better commentary. Baseball leaves too much silence for bad announcers to feel badly. Hector pointed at her. That is exactly right. That is the exact correct analysis. My father had it on the radio every Sunday. I spent a lot of time listening to bad announcers. What did your father do? A half-beat pause that most people wouldn't catch. He ran a company, she said. He was good at it. Not great at much else. Hector nodded with the satisfaction of someone who understood exactly what that meant. My father was a plumber, best plumber in the borough, couldn't fix a conversation to save his life. Victoria laughed. Hector looked delighted. Nathan went back to the bread and thought that the bakery had done something he couldn't entirely explain. It had flattened her somehow, but not in a way that diminished her. More like it had removed the altitude. She was just a person here. A person who knew something about bad football announcers and gas station turkey clubs, and had a palate specific enough to identify a slightly off cardamom ratio. He didn't say any of this to anyone. He barely said it to himself. But he noticed it. The way you notice a shift in a room's temperature. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a gradual awareness that something has changed from what it was. She met Lily on a Saturday in late November. It hadn't been planned. Nathan brought Lily to the bakery most Saturday mornings because the alternative was paying Mrs. Park for weekend hours, which he couldn't always manage, and because Lily, contrary to every expectation, actually liked being there. She liked the equipment, the scale, the way flour behaved when you dropped it. She had a specific stool she considered hers and a specific apron that was far too large for her and that she refused to exchange for a smaller one on the grounds that the large one had more pockets. Victoria arrived at 9:15 as usual and stopped when she saw the small person wearing an enormous apron standing on a stool behind the counter, deeply focused on measuring something into a bowl. That's Lily, Nathan said. She's doing the cinnamon rolls today. I thought you said she has opinions about the cinnamon rolls. She does. She's putting them into practice. Victoria looked at Lily. Lily, with the sensory awareness of a child who understood when adults were talking about her, looked up. Who are you? Lily said. Not rudely, just directly, the way 7-year-olds dispense with the social lubricant that adults spend years applying. I'm Victoria, said Victoria. I come here on Tuesdays. I don't come on Tuesdays, Lily said. I come on Saturdays. I know, your dad mentioned you. Lily processed this with the gravity it deserved. What did he say? That you're exceptional at math and you think the cinnamon rolls need more cinnamon. Lily straightened on her stool. They do. Do you want to try one? I'm making them right now. I would like that very much, Victoria said. Nathan watched his daughter redirect her full attention to the bowl with renewed purpose. He watched Victoria pull up a stool, not from a distance, not hovering. She just sat down beside Lily at the counter like it was the obvious thing to do, and asked what she was measuring. Cinnamon, Lily said. How much are you using? Dad's recipe says 2 teaspoons. I'm doing 3. What happens if you do 4? Lily looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at the ceiling. Let's find out, Victoria said. She's not supposed to encourage this, Nathan said to no one in particular. 4 teaspoons, Lily decided, with the confidence of someone who has found an ally. She measured it out with the concentrated precision she applied to math. Level teaspoons, carefully scraped. Are you Dad's friend? Victoria glanced at Nathan briefly. Yes, she said. He doesn't have very many friends. Lily? You don't, Lily said reasonably. You have Delia and Mr. Okafor and Mrs. Park, but Mrs. Park is more of a neighbor. You have Marcus, but he's family. I have other friends, Nathan said. Name one. Victoria was pressing her lips together in a way that suggested she was working very hard not to laugh. I have plenty of friends, Nathan said. Okay, Lily said, in the tone of a child who has decided not to win every argument today. She looked back at Victoria. Have you ever made cinnamon rolls before? Never. Then you can help. Lily slid the bowl fractionally toward her. You have to knead the dough. Dad says the kneading is the most important part, but I think it's the cinnamon. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Victoria said. What does exclusive mean? It means two things can both be important at the same time. Lily thought about this. Okay, she said. Then the kneading and the cinnamon. She looked at Victoria's blazer. You need an apron. Nathan brought Victoria an apron. He tied it in the back because the ties were awkwardly placed, and for a second he was standing close enough that he could smell whatever she used in her hair. Something simple, something that wasn't trying to be anything. And he stepped back and went to the far end of the counter and began doing something entirely unnecessary with the bread-proofing schedule. The cinnamon rolls that came out of the oven an hour and 20 minutes later were, by any objective measure, excessive. The cinnamon was visible, aggressively, almost confrontationally visible. The icing, which Lily had also amended more, pooled around the base of each roll in a moat of pure sugar. Nathan tasted one with the specific expression of a person trying to be neutral. Well, Lily demanded. They're incredible, Victoria said on her second bite. I'm not being polite. This is the best cinnamon roll I've ever eaten, and I've eaten cinnamon rolls in 7 countries. Lily pointed at Nathan. See? They're very sweet, Nathan said. That's the point of a cinnamon roll, Lily said. It's in the name, cinnamon, roll, not bread that tastes like sadness roll. Victoria made a sound that was definitely a laugh being swallowed. She covered it with a cough that didn't fool anyone. She gets the vocabulary from me, Nathan said. She gets the logic from herself, Victoria said. They ate cinnamon rolls at the counter, the 3 of them. Lily explaining the hedgehog detective with a thoroughness that assumed Victoria had seen none of it and required a full recap from the pilot, Victoria asking clarifying questions that were either genuine or extremely well performed, Nathan refilling coffees and feeling something he couldn't quite name settle somewhere in his chest. Not quite happiness. Not yet. But something adjacent to it, something that hadn't been there before. When Victoria left that afternoon, later than usual, nearly 2 o'clock, Lily watched her go through the window and then turned to Nathan with an expression that 7-year-olds deploy when they've formed a fully completed opinion and are about to deliver it. I like her, Lily announced. Good. She asks real questions. What does that mean? Lily looked at him like he should already know. When I talk about the hedgehog detective, most grown-ups say, "Oh, how fun," and then start talking about something else. She asked who the villain is in season 2. She paused, and she was actually interested in the answer. Nathan looked at the window where Victoria's car had been. Yeah, he said. She does that. Is she coming back? I think so. Lily nodded, satisfied, and went to find her coat. December came in cold and fast, the way it does in the Northeast, and the bakery shifted into its winter rhythms. More soups, more of the heavy rye breads, the ginger molasses cookies that had been his father's holiday recipe, and that Nathan kept threatening to take off the menu and never did. The windows fogged from the heat of the ovens, and the regulars came in stamping snow off their boots and warming their hands around their cups, and the small dining area in the front filled with the particular intimacy of cold weather and warm places. Victoria noticed the shift. You have a winter version, she said, one Tuesday in December, looking at the new menu on the chalkboard. Everything has a winter version. The Danish is gone. Seasonal. It'll come back in March. She looked at the board with the expression of someone who has been told something they find mildly inconvenient. What do you recommend? The ginger molasses. My father's recipe. I've been making it since I was old enough to read the card he wrote it on, which has flour stains on it from 1992. Then I'll have that. He brought her 2 cookies and sat across from her because by December he didn't ask anymore. He just sat, and she didn't gesture anymore. She just waited. Tell me something true, she said. It was something she'd started doing, not every Tuesday, but sometimes, a way of cutting past the accumulation of small talk that could fill any amount of time if you let it. Nathan bit into a cookie and thought about it. I've been thinking about expanding the bakery, he said. There's a space next door that's been empty for 4 months. I've looked at the numbers probably 30 times, and every time they're close, but not right. Close how? Like I could make it work if nothing went wrong for 12 consecutive months, which is not a realistic operating assumption. What would the expansion do? I could add a small cafe section, more seating, a proper espresso setup, maybe a weekend brunch menu. The neighborhood is there for it. I know the foot traffic. I know the customer base. It's just the capital risk. She was looking at him with a very specific expression, not the one people wore when they were about to offer advice, but the one they wore when they were deliberately not doing that. "What?" he said. "Nothing. You have an expression. I have many expressions. This specific expression, like you're holding something back." She was quiet for a second. "I'm trying not to offer to solve it," she said, "because that's what I'd normally do in this kind of conversation. Identify a problem, apply a resource, resolve it. But I don't think I think you're telling me about the numbers because you're still working through it, not because you want the problem removed." Nathan looked at her across the cookie plate. "That's right," he said. "So I'm just listening. You can ask questions. Why didn't the numbers work last time you ran them? The renovation estimate came in higher than I expected. If I can find a contractor who will negotiate, or if the landlord will agree to delayed start on the lease..." He stopped. "I have a meeting with the landlord next week." "Good. It might go nowhere. It might not." He ate the rest of his cookie. Outside, it had started to snow. Not heavily, just the preliminary snow, the kind that scouts ahead of the real thing. A few flakes appeared against the window and dissolved. "Tell me something true," he said, because it went both ways. Victoria looked at the window. She did that often. Looked at the window, or the door, or the middle distance, the way people do when they're deciding how honestly to answer something. "I canceled a trip to Singapore last month," she said. "Why?" "I told myself it was because the deal had shifted and I could handle it remotely." She paused. "But that wasn't fully true." "What was the other part?" She was quiet for a moment. "I've been looking forward to Tuesdays," she said, like she was reporting a fact she hadn't fully decided how to feel about. "I didn't want to lose the Tuesday." Nathan didn't say anything for a second. "That's a significant thing to admit," he finally said. "I know. For a canceled Singapore trip. Singapore will still be there." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not sure Tuesdays are guaranteed." It was a strange thing to say. Nathan understood exactly what she meant. He didn't reach across the table or say anything that would have required either of them to name what this was. He just said, "I'm glad you stayed quietly," meaning all of it. The canceled trip, the Tuesday, the cookies, the whole accumulation of weeks. "The cookies are better than the Danish," she said, which was her way of accepting what he'd said. "They're different, not better. The cinnamon ratio is more confident." He laughed. "You and Lily are going to agree about everything." "Probably." She looked out at the snow. "That doesn't seem like a problem." It didn't seem like a problem at all. What happened in January was not a single event, but an accumulation of them, the kind that builds pressure without announcing itself. Victoria's schedule, which had been easing slightly through December, snapped back in the new year with the violence of a rubber band held too long. She had a board meeting in Chicago, a development review in Boston, a series of investor calls that kept her in the office until 9 or 10 at night for 2 weeks running. Nathan knew this not from any official disclosure, but from the irregular Tuesdays. She came but later, sometimes only for 20 minutes, the coffee going cold while she answered messages on her phone with one hand and ate the held Danish with the other. "Go," Nathan said one Tuesday in mid-January, when she'd been staring at her phone for the 4th time in 10 minutes. She looked up. "I'm not... You're here and your head is in a building in Boston. Go deal with Boston." "I wanted to... Come back when Boston is done," he said, not unkindly. "The Danish will still be here." She looked at him for a second with an expression he was starting to recognize. The one she got when someone said something that was kind without being soft, that acknowledged the reality of her life without apologizing for it or resenting it. People, he'd gathered, often did one or the other. They either pretended the demands didn't exist or they resented them. "I'll be back Thursday," she said. "I'll have the cardamom ratio ready. Work on it." She left at a pace that suggested Boston was genuinely not going to resolve itself without her attention, and Nathan watched the door close behind her and thought about what it must cost. Not the money, not the logistics, but the actual cost, the thing you paid in your body, in the part of yourself that wanted to sit somewhere warm and eat cookies and not think about Singapore or Boston or the board meeting in Chicago. She came back Thursday. She came back the following Tuesday. She started arriving earlier on some days and bringing things, not gifts, nothing like that, more like information. A review she'd read about a bakery expansion in Seattle that had navigated the capital problem differently. A name of a contractor someone in her network had used for commercial renovation. She offered these things casually, parenthetically, the way you mention something you happen to come across. And Nathan took them the same way, because they both understood that there was a version of this where it went wrong, where it became her fixing his life, her wealth reorganizing his world, and that version would have ruined whatever this was. She never offered money. He never asked. They maintained this unspoken boundary the way people maintain a truce, not by discussing it, but by understanding together that it mattered. Marcus, recovered from his surgery and installed in Nathan's bakery on a Saturday afternoon in February under the pretense of helping but mostly drinking coffee and offering opinions, met Victoria for the first time. He handled it poorly. Not rudely. Marcus was not a rude person, but he did the thing that people do when they find out someone is famous or powerful, or both, which was to become approximately 20% more formal than normal, and reference things he'd read about her company in a way that was obviously research conducted in the 20 minutes before he arrived. I actually read about the VL development deal in Portland, Marcus said. That was a smart acquisition. Victoria thanked him politely. And what was it, the warehouse conversion in Detroit? That was interesting. It was a complicated project, she said, in the tone of someone who has discussed a complicated project enough times that discussing it more holds limited appeal. I can imagine. The community resistance must have been, Marcus, Nathan said. Marcus stopped. Stop doing the thing you're doing, Nathan said. What thing? Nathan gave him a look that conveyed, in the way that only sibling looks can, an entire conversation's worth of information without a word. Marcus sat back. He looked at Victoria. He said more naturally, I'm sorry. I Googled you this morning. That was stupid. Victoria, who had been sitting very straight, relaxed by one perceptible degree. I appreciate the honesty, she said. It's just, Nathan didn't exactly explain what kind of person you were. What did he say? He said he'd met someone interesting. Then he refused to say anything else. Marcus looked at his brother. For 3 months. Nathan reached for his coffee. He talks about you, Marcus said to Victoria. He doesn't know he does, but he does. He mentions things you said, uses phrases that aren't his. He paused. Like recently, he told Lily that 2 things can both be important at the same time when she was arguing about something. That's not Nathan language. Victoria looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at the window. That's my phrase, she said. That's your phrase, Marcus confirmed, which is the kind of thing that happens when someone is in your head. Marcus, Nathan started. I'm just observing, Marcus said. As someone who had emergency surgery because of you, I reserve the right to observe. He looked at Victoria. He's private. He's not great at asking for things. He spent about 2 years after Lily's mom left being more or less a closed door. And I don't say that to make you feel sorry for him. He'd hate that. I say it because. He stopped. I don't know why I'm saying this. Because you're worried about him, Victoria said. Marcus nodded. That's fair, she said. She held Marcus's gaze with the directness that Nathan had noticed from the first night. No deflection, no social softening. I'm not going anywhere. You can't know that. No, she said, but I know it right now, and right now is what I have. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee. You're good with the present tense, he said. I've learned to be. Most people who run companies aren't. Most people who run companies aren't happy either. So. Marcus looked at Nathan over his coffee cup with an expression that said, unmistakably, okay. I see it. And Nathan looked back with an expression that said, I know, I know. And Victoria looked out the window like she'd given the brothers a moment on purpose, which she probably had, because she noticed things like that. What nobody talked about in those early months was what it looked like from the outside. Nathan noticed it gradually, the way you notice a draft. Not the source, just the effect. Comments from customers that were one beat too knowing. The way some of his regulars watched the table by the window with a particular attention. A post on a neighborhood social media group. Someone had photographed the outside of the bakery, and in the background through the glass, Victoria was visible at her usual table. The caption was innocuous, something about the bakery being a local gem, but the comments had taken it somewhere else. "Isn't that Victoria Langford? What is she doing there?" He showed Delia the post. Delia read it and handed the phone back without comment. "Say something," Nathan said. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. Something." "People are going to talk," Delia said. "That's what people do. You can't be surprised that a billionaire coming to your bakery every week generates attention." "It's not a show," Nathan said. "She's not here for... It's not a thing." "I know it's not a thing," Delia said. "You know it's not a thing. She obviously knows it's not a thing." She looked at him steadily. "But other people don't know what it is, so they're going to decide for themselves. That's not something you can control." He didn't tell Victoria about the post. He wasn't sure why. Partly because it seemed like a small thing. It was a small thing, a few comments on a neighborhood page. Partly because he didn't want her to feel observed. She spent her whole professional life being observed, and the bakery was the one place where she wasn't, and he wasn't going to hand her that piece of information and make her self-conscious in the only place she seemed to not be. He added it, instead, to a small private ledger he was keeping in the back of his mind. Things that reminded him of the gap between their worlds, the ways in which this was not a simple thing regardless of how easy it felt inside the bakery walls. He worked on this ledger more than he should have. There was the neighborhood page comment. There was the afternoon in February when Victoria mentioned, offhandedly, that she'd been invited to a fundraising dinner in Washington and was deciding whether to go. And Nathan had realized he didn't fully understand what deciding whether to go to Washington for a fundraiser meant when you lived in Victoria's world. Whether it was a genuine decision or a performance of one, whether the people there were colleagues or just the layer of society she moved through. There was the morning he'd been pulling receipts and realized, for the first time in a concrete way, the actual numerical difference in their circumstances. Not just abstractly. The Forbes number was abstract, large enough to not feel real, but specifically, the cost of one deal she'd mentioned casually at lunch was more than 10 years of his bakery's revenue. He didn't say this to her. He didn't say it to anyone. He just added it to the ledger. And he kept showing up, because showing up was the only thing he knew how to do. And because when he was with her in the back room of the bakery, or across the window table, or standing side by side at the counter, watching Lily make architectural decisions about cinnamon roll icing, the ledger didn't feel like it existed. It was only when he was alone that it became heavy. February moved into March. The cardamom pear Danish returned to the menu, and Victoria appeared the first Tuesday of March and looked at the chalkboard and said, "Finally," with a feeling that was out of proportion to a pastry, and that made Nathan laugh. The landlord meeting had happened in January. Nathan had gotten the lease extension he'd needed, and the contractor whose name Victoria had passed along had come in under the renovation estimate by 11%, which had made the expansion numbers work for the first time. He'd signed the papers on a Thursday, alone in the office with a pen that needed to be shaken to get the ink running, and he'd felt something between terror and the particular relief that follows a decision you've been avoiding. He told Victoria on the first Tuesday in March, after she'd ordered the Danish, and he'd sat down. "The expansion," he said. "I signed." She set down her coffee. "When?" 3 weeks ago. I was going to tell you then, but the Boston thing." 3 weeks ago," she said. "Nathan." "I know. You've been carrying that for 3 weeks." "I was processing." "You were not processing. You were sitting with it alone because you don't know how to share good news." She looked at him with exasperation that was also, around the edges, something else. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying," he said. "Expensive. Like I jumped off something and haven't looked down yet." "Good. That's exactly how it should feel." "That's not comforting." "It's not supposed to be comforting. Comfortable decisions don't change anything." She picked up her Danish. "I'm proud of you." The words landed in a quiet way, without fanfare. Nathan hadn't expected them, and he didn't know what to do with them, so he just said thank you simply and meant it completely. She told him that afternoon, after they'd moved to the back room, and Nathan had heated up the last of the morning soup because it was cold and neither of them seemed in a hurry, that she'd been thinking about what she wanted the next year to look like. She'd been talking to her partner at VL Development about restructuring some of her day-to-day oversight, bringing in a COO who could take more operational responsibility, freeing her to stay in the advisory and strategic role without being needed in 4 cities in 4 days. "Is that something you want, or something that makes sense?" Nathan asked. She looked at him across the soup. "Both," she said. "For the first time in a while, both." Nathan didn't ask what had changed. He thought he knew, and he thought naming it would make it fragile the way naming certain things does. So he ate his soup and she ate hers, and outside the high window, the first real snow of February, late, arriving in March like it had missed its cue, came down in the heavy, serious flakes that meant business. "It's snowing," Lily said, appearing in the doorway to the back room with her enormous apron and flour on her nose, because she'd arrived at some point in the last hour without Nathan noticing, which was a thing that happened when you were 7, and you knew the bakery the way you knew your own bedroom. "It is snowing," Victoria agreed. "Can we make hot chocolate?" "We don't have a hot chocolate setup," Nathan said. "We have milk and we have cocoa powder and we have sugar," Lily said. "That's a setup. That's improvisation." "It's the same thing." Lily looked at Victoria. "Victoria, tell him it's the same thing." Victoria looked at Nathan. She was sitting in the back room of his bakery in the snow light, with a soup bowl in front of her and flour from somewhere on her sleeve, and she looked like someone who had finally, after a long time of being somewhere else, arrived at a place she intended to stay for a while. "It's the same thing," she told him. Nathan got up to find the cocoa powder. The hot chocolate that afternoon had been made badly. The cocoa powder hadn't dissolved cleanly, and there were small dark specks floating in all 3 mugs. And Lily had declared it the best hot chocolate she'd ever had, which Nathan suspected said more about the company than the cooking. He thought about that for a long time afterward. How easy it had been. How natural. The 3 of them in the back room of the bakery with the snow coming down outside, and the mugs and the soup bowls on the table, and nobody performing anything for anyone. That was the problem, he realized later. Not the ease itself. The ease was good. The ease was the best part. But the way it made him lower his guard so completely that he stopped watching for the thing that was going to go wrong. He should have kept watching. March ended. The expansion construction started on the space next door, which meant the bakery ran for 6 weeks with the sound of drilling on the other side of the wall and a fine layer of plaster dust that settled on everything, regardless of how many times Delia wiped the surfaces down. The regulars were tolerant about it in the way that people are tolerant about inconveniences happening to a place they love. Mr. Okafor said the dust gave his croissant a certain rustic quality. The construction workers from 2 years back, different job, same crew, materialized again as though summoned and proceeded to devour the cinnamon rolls at 7:15 every morning with the same devotion as before. Nathan was in the bakery by 4:30 most mornings during the construction period, trying to get ahead of the day before the noise started. He was tired in a way that lived in his back and behind his eyes, the specific exhaustion of someone running 2 operations simultaneously out of one body. The loan payment would start in June. The renovation was 3 weeks behind schedule because of a permit delay. He had a spreadsheet open on his laptop every night after Lily went to bed, rearranging numbers that didn't have much room left to rearrange. Victoria noticed. She didn't say anything directly. She wasn't the kind of person who named the thing you were carrying before you were ready to set it down yourself. But she started arriving earlier, before the drilling started, and she brought things. Not money. Never money. They'd maintained that without ever discussing it. But time. She sat in the bakery for whole mornings sometimes, working from her laptop at the window table, a quiet presence that somehow made the drilling less invasive. She picked up Lily twice from school when Nathan was stuck with the contractor, and Mrs. Park wasn't available, and she did it without it becoming a thing, just sent a text that said, "I have Lily, take your time." And Nathan had stood in the middle of a renovation argument with the contractor holding his phone and felt something loosen in his chest. It was that kind of spring, full of small mercies that he was too tired to properly receive. The first sign of trouble came from a direction he should have expected. His mother called on a Thursday evening in April. Eleanor Carter called every Thursday, reliably, from her retirement in Florida, and the calls followed a predictable structure. 15 minutes about his father's gardening, 10 minutes about Lily, 5 minutes about the bakery, and then usually a small advisory segment that she delivered in the tone of someone raising a practical concern rather than interfering. This call skipped the gardening. "Marcus tells me you're spending a lot of time with someone," his mother said. "Marcus needs a hobby that isn't talking to you about me. He's worried. He's nosy. Those are different things." "Nathan." Her voice carried the specific quality it had always carried when she was about to say something he didn't want to hear but couldn't disagree with. "He says she's a billionaire." "She's a person," Nathan said, "who happens to have money. A lot of money." "Yes." "Nathan, I'm not saying this to be unkind. I'm saying it because I know how you work." She paused. "You get attached. You commit before you know if something is going to hold. And then when it doesn't..." She stopped. "I watched what happened after Lily's mother left. I'm not going to watch that again. This is different." "How?" He opened his mouth and then closed it, because the answer he had, because she stayed, because she showed up, because she sat in the back room and drank bad hot chocolate and told Lily two things can be important at the same time, didn't sound, when he tried to say it, like an argument against what his mother was describing. "These people don't live the way we live," his mother said gently. "They can choose to, for a while. But eventually she goes back to her world, Nathan. She has to. That's where her life is." "Her life is also here," he said. But even as he said it, the private ledger opened somewhere in the back of his mind. Singapore, Boston, Chicago, Washington, the board meetings, and the investor calls and the black car appearing on cue. "I just want you to be careful," his mother said. He told her he would be. He got off the phone and stood in his kitchen in the quiet of after Lily's bedtime, which was usually a quiet he liked, and found that tonight it had an edge to it. He didn't say anything to Victoria. The week passed. The drilling continued. The spreadsheet numbers moved fractionally in the right direction. Victoria came on Tuesday, and they ate lunch in the back room, and she told him about a conversation she'd had with her potential COO candidate, a woman named Petra, sharp and pragmatic, and apparently able to run a meeting in a way that left no procedural residue, which was apparently rare, and it was a good Tuesday, the easy kind, the kind he'd stopped feeling grateful for because he'd started taking them for granted. Which, he would understand later, was exactly when the rot starts. The thing about fear is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive saying, "I am fear, and I am here to do damage." It arrives as logic, as reasonable concern, as the kind of thinking that on paper looks like wisdom. Nathan started rereading the ledger. He started doing it at night when Lily was asleep and the spreadsheet was closed and there was nothing left to occupy the part of his brain that was very good at finding problems. The neighborhood page post, which he'd never quite forgotten. The Singapore trip. The fundraiser in Washington. The sheer numerical gap between their lives that had not gotten smaller. He'd taken on debt. She'd probably made 3 decisions that morning that were worth more than his entire net worth. He thought about what his mother had said. These people don't live the way we live. He thought about Lily, who had said, "I like her," with the complete confidence of a 7-year-old who didn't understand risk, who didn't understand what it would mean to like someone and then have them leave. He thought about himself, after Lily's mother had gone. The 2 years of being, as Marcus had put it to Victoria with more honesty than Nathan would have chosen, a closed door. The specific shape that loss had made in him, which had healed in the way that bones heal. Stronger in the break, maybe, but never quite the same. He started pulling back in small ways that he could rationalize individually. He stopped sitting down at the window table uninvited and waited to be asked, which technically was just being respectful of her time. He let the Tuesday lunches slide to once every 2 weeks, citing the construction schedule, which was true but not the whole truth. He answered her texts more slowly, sometimes not until the next morning, which was easy to explain as busy and harder to explain as deliberate distance. Victoria noticed almost immediately. Of course she did. She noticed everything. She didn't say anything for the first week. She came on Tuesday, and Nathan was genuinely occupied, man. There was a real problem with the espresso equipment installation, and their interaction was brief and practical, and she left without the usual window table extension, and Nathan told himself this was fine, this was normal, this was just how things went during construction. The second week she sat at the table longer than usual, as though waiting him out, and he kept finding things to do at the far end of the counter, and finally she stood and left without the back room, and he watched her go and felt, simultaneously, relief, and something that tasted a lot like the thing his mother had been warning him about, which was ironic. The third week she arrived on a Tuesday morning in early May, and the bell above the door rang, and Nathan turned, and the expression on her face when she saw him was not the expression of someone who was fine. She sat down. He brought the Danish and the coffee. He didn't sit. "Are you going to tell me what's happening?" she said. "I'm busy," he said. "The construction—" "Nathan." The way she said his name, flat, precise, the way she said things when she was done with the diplomatic approach, stopped him. He sat down. "Something changed," she said. "I want to know what." "Nothing changed." "You've been—" She paused, visibly choosing her words. "You've been somewhere else for 3 weeks. When I'm here, you're across the room. You're not answering texts until the next day. I'm not angry. I'm—" She stopped again. "Tell me what happened." He looked at the table. "My mother said some things." "Your mother." "She's not wrong. She raised points that are—" He looked up. "What are we doing, Victoria?" She went very still. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm a baker with a renovation loan and a 7-year-old and you're—" He gestured vaguely, meaning everything, meaning the Forbes article in Singapore and the black car. "You're you, and the Tuesdays are good, they're really good, but eventually—" "Eventually what?" Her voice was careful, precise, dangerous, in the way of something that has gone very quiet. "Eventually you go back." "Go back where?" "To your life. Your actual life. This—" He gestured at the bakery. "This is a break for you, a place to breathe. I get that. I understand what it gives you, but it's not—" He stopped. "Lily is attached." "I know she is." "So am I." He said it bluntly because dancing around it would have been worse. "And I've done this before, the attached part. And when the person decides to leave—" He stopped. "I'm not planning to leave." "You can't know that." She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted. Not hurt. Not yet. But something that was preparing to become hurt, steeling itself. "You've decided," she said quietly, without talking to me. "You've decided what I'm going to do, and you're protecting yourself from it in advance." "I'm being realistic. You're being afraid," she said, which is different. The bakery was in its mid-morning lull, the post-rush quiet, and they were the only people at the tables. Delia was in the back. The construction on the other side of the wall had, for once, gone silent. It was the most privacy they'd had in a public space in weeks, which felt horribly timed. "Tell me something," Victoria said. "When I come here, what do you think I'm doing?" "Taking a break?" "I'm not taking a break," she said, with a force that was controlled, calibrated, but present. "I don't take breaks. I'm not good at breaks. I've never been good at breaks." She put her coffee down. "I come here because it's the only place I want to be. That's not a break. That's a choice. I make it every single Tuesday, and I've been making it for 6 months. And you know what, Nathan? I've made choices worth a lot more than that without thinking nearly as carefully." "That's different." "Why? Because those choices were professional? Because those choices made money?" Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it now, something that had been building longer than this conversation. "I've been trying to show you for 6 months that this—" She gestured between them, the same gesture he'd made about the bakery, about her life. "Is not a project. It's not a diversion. It's not me slumming it in a nice neighborhood. I didn't say—" "You implied it. You implied it just now when you said eventually you go back to your actual life. As if this isn't my actual life." She leaned forward slightly. "As if I'm not a person who gets to choose what her life is." Nathan was quiet. Outside, a bus went past. The window rattled slightly in its frame, as it always did. "I just don't understand," he said, and it came out more raw than he intended. "What you want from this." Something crossed her face, not anger, it was past anger, which would have been easier to deal with. It was something more tired than anger. I want what we already have, she said. I want the back room and the bad hot chocolate, and Lily explaining the hedgehog detective and the cardamom Danish, and the conversations where you push back and you're right, and I say so. She met his eyes. I want you. That's what I want. And I'm sitting here watching you talk yourself out of it, and I can't. I don't know how to make you believe it if you're determined not to. The silence that followed was one of the harder ones he'd ever sat in. I'm not determined not to, he said finally. Then what are you doing? He didn't have an answer, not a good one. He had the ledger, the logic, the reasonable-sounding fear dressed up as wisdom. But sitting here, across from her, watching her hold the conversation together with a steadiness that was costing her something. He could see it costing her, the slight tightness around her eyes, the way she was sitting a half-degree more rigidly than usual. The ledger felt less like wisdom and more like what it was. I'm scared, he said. I know, she said. Lily's mother. I'm not Lily's mother, she said, not unkindly. I'm not the person who left. I've been the person who shows up. For 6 months I've been the person who shows up. She paused. But I can't do that indefinitely if you won't let me actually be here. He nodded slowly, looking at the table. Okay, she said after a moment. I'm going to leave, and you're going to think about what you actually want. Not what's safe, not what's logical, what you want. She picked up her bag. I'll be here Tuesday. She left. Nathan sat at the table for a long time, which was not something he did, which was notable enough that Delia appeared from the back and stood in the doorway and looked at him sitting alone at the window table with the untouched second coffee in front of him. That looked bad, Delia said. It wasn't great, Nathan said. What did you do? He looked at her. Why do you assume I did something? Delia's expression was patient and absolute. Because you're sitting at the window table in the middle of the morning like the world ended, and she left without her usual goodbye, and you have the look of a man who talked himself into something stupid. She folded her arms. So, what did you do? He told her. Not all of it, but enough. Delia listened the way Delia always listened, without interrupting, without making sounds that indicated either agreement or judgment, just receiving the information. When he finished, she said, You told a woman who canceled a Singapore trip to spend Tuesdays with you that she's just taking a break from her real life. I didn't say it like that. That's what she heard. He rubbed his face with both hands. My mother. Your mother is scared for you. That's different from being right. Delia sat down across from him, which she never did during business hours. Nathan, that woman sat in your back room and drank terrible hot chocolate and asked Lily about a cartoon hedgehog detective. She reorganized her company so she could be here more. What else does she need to do? I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe nothing. Maybe the problem isn't what she needs to do. Maybe it's what you need to stop doing. She looked at him levelly. You've been waiting for it to fall apart since the beginning. Every time it doesn't fall apart, you find a new reason to wait for it. That's not caution, Nathan. That's self-sabotage with a better vocabulary. She got up and went back behind the counter. Nathan sat there. He went home that evening and cooked dinner and listened to Lily's debrief with the same attention he always gave it. But part of him was elsewhere. And Lily, who was perceptive in the way of children who've learned to read adult moods by necessity, kept looking at him across the table with small sideways glances. Are you okay? She asked, finally. I'm fine, Bug. You have the face you make when the invoices are bad. The invoices are fine. Is Victoria coming Saturday? He paused. I don't know. Maybe. Lily looked at him with 7-year-old directness. Did you do something wrong? Why does everyone assume... He stopped. I don't know, maybe. Lily considered this for a moment, with the fork still in her hand, a piece of pasta speared on it that she'd forgotten about. You should say sorry, she said. That's what you tell me. When you do something wrong, you say sorry fast before it gets complicated. Who told you that? You did. She ate the pasta. You say that all the time. He didn't remember saying it all the time, but it sounded like the kind of thing he said, and probably should have been following more consistently. I know, he said. So say sorry fast, Lily said, with the resolution of someone who had solved the problem and was ready to move on. Before it gets complicated. He nodded. It was already complicated. The next few weeks were the kind that teach you things about yourself that you'd have preferred not to learn. Victoria came on Tuesday as she'd said she would. Nathan didn't pull away the way he had before. He sat down, he stayed, they talked, but something had shifted in the atmosphere between them that hadn't fully reset. They were both a little more careful, a little more measured. The backroom lunches happened, but they were shorter, and the conversation was good, but it was good the way a repaired thing is good. Functional, present, but carrying the history of the break. He thought he was handling it. He was not handling it. The event that broke things open came on a Friday evening in late May, when Nathan was working late. The espresso equipment had finally been installed, and he was trying to learn the machine before the cafe section opened. And he heard voices in the front that he recognized as belonging to people who weren't customers. He came through the swinging door from the kitchen to find two men he didn't know standing at the counter, talking to Delia, who was wearing the expression she wore when she was being civil at the expense of her actual opinions. They were, it became clear in about 30 seconds, financial journalists. Not aggressive, not threatening, just professional and slightly too smooth. The kind of people who'd been trained to ask questions in ways that made answering them feel natural. "We're doing a piece," one of them said, turning to Nathan with a card appearing from nowhere, "on Victoria Langford's recent pivot, the restructuring at VL Development. We understand she's been spending significant time in this neighborhood, and we wanted to get a sense of what?" Nathan said. "Of the relationship between the Langford organization and local businesses. There's been some interest in whether she's planning a development investment in the Maplewood corridor." Nathan looked at the card. He looked at Delia. He looked back at them. "She comes in for coffee," he said. "That's it?" "Right, of course. But in terms of any business discussions—" "There aren't any," Nathan said. "She's a customer." The man with the card wrote something down. Nathan didn't like the way he wrote it. "There's been some speculation," the other man said, with the light tone of someone deploying speculation as a weapon, "that Miss Langford's interest in the area is more than professional, given the frequency of her visits." Nathan said nothing. "Our readers are interested in what motivates her investments. Whether there's a personal component, I think you should go," Nathan said. They went. They were professionals. They knew when they'd gotten what they came for, which was apparently the expression on Nathan's face when they implied what they'd implied. He stood behind the counter for a moment after they left. "Nathan," Delia started. "I'm fine. You're not. And for what it's worth, I know," he said. "I know." He called Marcus that night instead of Victoria, which told you everything about where his head was. "Journalists," Marcus said when Nathan had explained. "Okay, that's annoying. What else?" "What do you mean, what else?" "That's not what's actually bothering you." Nathan was quiet. "Nathan." "They said personal component," he said. Like she's here because of some investment strategy. Like the whole—" He stopped. "Like I'm a what? A project? A real estate angle? And the worst part is I don't even fully know that's not—" He stopped again. "Not what?" "I don't know what her company's interest is in this neighborhood. I never asked." "Because you know it's not why she comes here." "Do I?" Marcus made a sound. "Nathan, come on!" "I know," Nathan said. "I know it's not. But the fact that I'm sitting here asking the question means you're scared." Delia said the same thing. Delia's right. Why does everyone keep being right? Because you keep being obvious. Marcus was quiet for a second. "Call her. Tell her about the journalists. Have the actual conversation." He didn't call her that night. He told himself it was too late. He told himself he'd do it in the morning. Morning came and the cafe section opened for the first time. A soft opening. Nothing promoted, just the machine running and a few extra tables. And he was busy, genuinely busy, and the call got pushed. The following Tuesday was the last normal Tuesday for a while, though he didn't know that. Victoria arrived at 9:15 and ordered the Danish and the coffee and sat at the window table. and she was reading something on her phone when she arrived, and she kept checking it with a frequency that suggested something was happening that she was monitoring. Nathan sat with her, but he was distracted. The cafe section was getting its first real test, and there was a calibration issue with the milk steamer that was driving him insane. And the conversation was fragmented, interrupted, neither of them fully present. She left at 10:15. Nathan walked her to the door. "Next week," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Next week." It felt like they were speaking a language that had been their own and was now slightly translated, and neither of them was acknowledging the translation. The conversation that broke everything happened by accident, which was probably how it had to happen. It was a Saturday in early June, and Nathan was in the back room going through the delivery schedule when he heard voices in the front. Familiar voices, men's voices, the particular pitch of a conversation happening between people who thought they were alone. He recognized Marcus first, then Derek, Marcus's friend, the one who had arranged the original blind date. He came in occasionally for coffee. He and Nathan were friendly in a surface way. They'd never had a real conversation. Nathan didn't move. "Seems serious," Derek was saying. "I don't know," Marcus said. "She's here all the time. A pause. "He's got it bad, but I don't know what she gets out of it." "What do you mean?" "I mean, she's who she is. What is she actually looking for here? You know, the bakery on Maplewood is not exactly... Maybe she likes him." "Sure, maybe. Or maybe it's the neighborhood. She's been looking at property in this corridor for 2 years. Derek, I did some research. VL Development has had their eye on 3 blocks of Maplewood." A pause. "You think she's using him for access? Intel? That's a stretch." "I'm not saying that. I'm saying I don't know what she wants. And Nathan's not asking the question because he's..." Marcus stopped. "He's falling for her, like for real. And she has her entire life in another dimension. I just don't see how this ends well for him." Nathan stood very still in the back room. He heard the door open and close. Another customer arriving, the conversation dropping. And he stood there with the delivery schedule in his hand and the words arranging themselves in a specific order in his mind. VL Development. 3 blocks of Maplewood. What does she want? He knew Marcus wasn't making an accusation. He knew Derek wasn't either. He knew they were 2 people talking through worry the way people do when they don't know what else to do with it. It didn't matter. The words had been said, and the part of Nathan that had been keeping the ledger took them and held them and would not let go. He put the delivery schedule down. He went back out front. He served the next customer. He smiled at Marcus when Marcus ordered, and Marcus clearly didn't know Nathan had heard anything, and Nathan didn't say so. He went home that night and did not open the spreadsheet. He sat at the kitchen table after Lily was in bed, and he thought about the first night at Ilara, how Victoria had said, "I run a company." A few, technically. He thought about how she'd known the development history of Maplewood better than he did. He thought about the way she'd mentioned the contractor, the way she'd passed along information about the expansion, all things he'd read as kindness, as care, as the specific intelligence of someone who had both knowledge and generosity. He thought about what those things looked like if you rotated the lens 90 degrees. He didn't believe it. Not really. Not the version where she'd been cultivating him as a local contact for a development strategy. That was not the woman who drank bad hot chocolate and asked Lily about cartoon hedgehogs. That was not possible. But the question had been planted, and he knew what questions did when they got planted in tired minds at night. They grew without permission. The following Tuesday, Victoria arrived at her usual time, but Nathan was not in front. He was in the back, and Delia served her, and it was 20 minutes before Nathan came out, and when he did, the way he came out, the careful, managed quality of it, the way he stood at the counter rather than walking to the table, Victoria saw it immediately. She looked at him across the room. He looked back. Something passed between them that needed to be said out loud and wasn't, and they both knew what it was, and neither of them knew yet how bad it was about to get. The thing about small distances is they compound. Every additional foot of space doesn't add to the gap. It multiplies it. He still hadn't told her about the journalists. He still hadn't said anything about what he'd overheard. He carried it for 9 days, and the carrying changed him in ways that were visible to everyone who knew him well enough to look. "Delia, you need to talk to her." Marcus, when he finally figured out Nathan had overheard, "Nathan, I didn't mean it like." "I know," Nathan said. "I know what you meant." "Then why are you acting like?" "I don't know," Nathan said. And that was the truest thing he'd said in weeks. He didn't know. He knew the fear was irrational, and he knew the doubt was mostly constructed, and he knew that Victoria had given him no actual reason to doubt her intentions, not one real reason, and he was doing it anyway, the way you pull at a thread even knowing you're unraveling something. The morning everything fell apart was warm. Early June, the city waking up to genuine summer. And Victoria arrived 20 minutes early, which she never did. She walked in with the expression of someone who had decided something on the way over and was carrying the decision in their jaw. She sat down. She didn't order. "I need to tell you something," she said when Nathan came to the table. He stood. "I've been in conversations," she said, "about a potential development project in this corridor. It's been in planning for about a year and a half. It would involve properties on Maplewood, including potentially this block. I want you to know that—" "I know," he said. She stopped. "You know. I heard Marcus talking to Derek last week about VL development and Maplewood." The silence that followed was different from other silences. "When?" she said. "Were you going to tell me you'd heard that?" "I don't know." Her expression didn't collapse. It crystallized. "You heard that, and you've spent 9 days—" She paused. "Is that what the distance has been?" "Partly." "Partly." Her voice was precise and very controlled. "What's the other part?" "There were journalists 2 weeks ago. They came here asking about you and this neighborhood and whether your interest was—" They implied it was strategic, connected to a development investment. She looked at him. "And you believed them?" "I don't know what I believed." "Nathan." She said it quietly, and that was somehow worse than if she'd said it loudly. "I was going to tell you about the Maplewood project today. I've been waiting until it was concrete enough to have an actual conversation, not just speculation. I would never—" She stopped. "Do you think I've been here for 6 months as some kind of—" "No," he said. "I don't think that." "Then what do you think?" "I think—" He stopped. He looked at the table. "I think you have a world that is enormous, and I have a world that is this." He looked around the bakery. "And I don't know how someone with your world ends up here. I can't fully make it make sense. And when the thing I overheard—" "Gave you a reason," she said. He looked at her. "You were looking for a reason," she said, and her voice had gone somewhere quiet and precise that he recognized as the voice of someone who had finally understood something they'd been trying to understand for a while. "Not because you found evidence, because you needed permission to run." She looked at him steadily. "Am I wrong?" He didn't answer, which was its own answer. She picked up her bag. "I'm going to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to actually think about it, not react." He nodded. "Do you genuinely believe that I have been here? Every Tuesday, the hot chocolate, Lily, the back room, every piece of it, as some kind of business strategy? Or are you choosing to believe it because it's less scary than the alternative?" He looked at her. "The alternative," she said when he didn't speak, "being that this is real and I am someone who is here because I want to be. And you have to decide whether to trust that." The words landed in the quiet of the morning bakery. The espresso machine hummed. Someone walked past the window outside. "I don't think it's strategy," he said. "I don't actually believe that." "Then what are you so afraid of?" He opened his mouth, and for the first time in weeks, he was about to say the true thing, the one underneath all the ledger entries and the reasonable logic and the fear dressed as wisdom. He was about to say it, the actual answer. But the door opened and 3 customers came in at once, and Delia appeared, and the moment fractured. He looked at Victoria. She was already standing. "I need you to figure out what you're afraid of," she said, quietly enough that only he could hear. "Actually figure it out, not manage it. Figure it out." She met his eyes. "Because I don't know how much longer I can keep showing up to someone who is waiting for me to leave." She walked out. Nathan stood at the window table and watched her go, and he did not go after her. And for the first time since she'd started coming to the bakery, he didn't know if she was coming back. The Danish sat on the table, untouched. He picked it up. He brought it back behind the counter. He wrapped it in paper. He had no idea what to do next. The wrapped Danish sat on the back counter for 3 days. Nathan wasn't sure why he didn't throw it out. It was stale by end of day 1, inedible by day 2, and by day 3 it had become something else entirely. Not food anymore, but a marker, an object that had absorbed the weight of an unfinished morning and refused to let him forget it. Delia saw it on Wednesday and didn't say anything, which meant she understood exactly what it was. He went through the days the way you go through days when something is wrong, but life doesn't stop for it. He opened the bakery at 5:30. He pulled the bread. He served the customers. He picked up Lily. He made dinner. He sat across from his daughter and listened to her talk about Gerald the bug and the hedgehog detective and the ongoing line leader dispute, and he answered in the right places and asked the right questions. And Lily, who was 7 and perceptive and also mercifully still a child, noticed something was off but couldn't identify it precisely and so let it go. He called Victoria twice, both times to voicemail. He left no messages because he couldn't figure out what a message would say that wouldn't sound like either an apology that missed the point or an explanation that made things worse. She didn't call back. Marcus called on Thursday. "She called me," Marcus said without preamble. "Victoria." "Yeah, to tell me she wasn't coming back to the bakery for a while." Nathan was in the office, sitting at the desk with the flour-stained recipe card on top of the invoice pile, which had accumulated there at some point, and which he kept not moving because the card had his father's handwriting on it, and sometimes that helped. "Did she say why?" Nathan asked, though he knew why. "She said she needed some space to think." A pause. "She also said to tell you that the Maplewood development isn't moving forward the way it was planned. She pulled it, redirected the capital to a different corridor." Nathan was quiet. "She pulled a real estate deal," Marcus said. "Nathan, do you understand what I'm telling you? She pulled a deal that's been in planning for 18 months because she didn't want it hanging over your head." "Marcus, I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I'm saying it so you have the complete picture." Another pause, longer. "And I'm saying it because what I said to Derek was thoughtless, and it did damage, and I'm sorry. I was worried about you, and I said the wrong thing in the wrong place, and it landed wrong, and that's on me." Nathan looked at the recipe card. The handwriting was small and specific. His father had very particular handwriting, the kind that looked like it had been practiced. "It wasn't just what you said," Nathan told him. "I was already looking for the exit. You just handed me a door. That's a terrible thing to do to yourself." "I know." "So what are you going to do?" Nathan didn't answer. He had not yet gotten to what he was going to do. He was still in the part where he sat with what he'd done. "She told me something else," Marcus said. "She said—" He stopped. "She said she's been afraid too. That the whole time she's been afraid too. And that she'd been fighting her way past it every Tuesday and she needed you to do the same." Nathan closed his eyes. "Okay," he said. "Okay, you understand, or okay, you'll do something about it?" "Both," Nathan said. "I don't know, both." He hung up and sat in the office for a while and looked at his father's handwriting and thought about a woman who had canceled Singapore and pulled an 18-month development deal and shown up every Tuesday for 6 months and what those things cost the person who did them. He thought about what she'd said. "I don't know how much longer I can keep showing up to someone who is waiting for me to leave." He thought about Lily saying, "Say sorry fast before it gets complicated." It was already complicated. That part was done. The question was what complicated meant when you were on the other side of it. The answer came to him not as a revelation, that's not how answers actually arrive, but as a gradual settling, the way bread rises not in one moment, but in the accumulation of 100 small ones. It came over 4 days that he spent doing the ordinary things of his life with more attention than usual, because when something important has gone wrong, the ordinary things become either a comfort or an indictment, and he was determined to let them be a comfort. He took Lily to school and watched her walk through the gate with her backpack and her particular walk, half march, half stride, the walk of a person with places to be. And he thought about what it meant that he'd spent 4 years rebuilding himself into someone capable of this specific love, and had been so afraid of losing it that he'd preemptively tried to lose something else. He served Mr. Okafor his croissant and got the Paris comparison as usual, and thought about how Mr. Okafor came every single day. Not because the croissant was better than Paris, but because the place was his, and he belonged to it. And belonging is not really about the croissant. He stood at the back counter at 6:30 in the morning, alone in the bakery before Delia arrived, and looked at the expansion, at the cafe section that was nearly ready, the espresso machine that was finally calibrated, the new tables and the window he'd had put in to let in more light, and understood that he'd been so busy being afraid it would fail that he'd barely let himself see that it was working. On Sunday evening, he sat down at the kitchen table after Lily was asleep and took out a piece of paper. He was not a person who wrote things down in this way. He kept lists, practical ones, delivery schedules, and inventory counts, but he'd run out of other ways to think clearly, and sometimes the only way to see something is to make it external. He wrote, "What am I actually afraid of?" He sat with the question, not the version he'd been telling himself, not the rational ledger-reading version where he'd organized his fears into reasonable columns, the actual thing. He wrote for a while. Some of it was Lily, which he'd known. Some of it was the bakery, the expansion, the loan, the fear that everything he'd built was contingent in ways he couldn't control. Some of it was Lily's mother, and the specific shape of that loss, which was not the same as grief but was adjacent to it. The particular damage of someone leaving a child and the way that damage becomes something you carry in your body rather than your mind. And then he wrote the thing that was underneath all of that, which he'd been not writing for months. I don't believe I'm enough for her. I don't believe someone like her, with everything she has, could genuinely want someone like me and not eventually realize the mistake. He looked at what he'd written. He sat with it for a long time. The thing about the true fear, the one underneath the constructed ones, is that it doesn't dissolve when you name it. It doesn't suddenly become manageable. It sits there being itself, being true, being the thing it always was. But naming it changes your relationship to it. You stop running from it and start being able to look at it directly. And when you can look at something directly, you can start to work out what it actually requires from you. What it required from him was not logic. He'd had plenty of logic. Logic had not helped. What it required was a choice, not a safe one, not a guaranteed one. Just the choice, made with the full knowledge of what he was afraid of, to go toward the thing anyway. He folded the piece of paper. He put it in the drawer with the recipe cards. He went to bed and slept better than he had in 2 weeks. Monday was a full day. Bread, cafe section running its first real Monday, a school meeting for Lily that he had to shift the afternoon schedule around, a delivery that came late and threw off the evening prep. He got through it without the paper-thin quality that the last 2 weeks had had. The ground felt more solid, not because anything had been resolved, nothing had been resolved, but because he'd stopped pretending to himself about what the real problem was. Tuesday morning, he called her. Voicemail again. This time he left a message. "It's Nathan," he said. "I know you need space. I'm not calling to push. He stopped, started again. "I figured out what I'm afraid of. You asked me to. I did it. And I'd like to tell you, if you'd let me. Whenever you're ready, there's no—" He paused. "There's no deadline. I just wanted you to know that I did what you asked." He hung up. He went and opened the bakery. The morning passed. No call. He hadn't expected one. Not yet, maybe not for a few days. But the absence of it was its own particular texture, like wearing something that almost fits. Delia arrived and looked at him with the specific attention she applied when she was assessing his current state. "You did something," she said. "Something different. You look less like a person who's been run over." I left her a voicemail. "What did you say?" "That I figured out what I was afraid of, and I want to tell her when she's ready." Delia was quiet for a moment. "That's good," she said. "That's the right thing. It might be too late. It might be. But it's still the right thing." She went behind the counter. "And Nathan?" "Yeah. The Danish. Throw it out." He looked at the back counter where the wrapped stale Danish had been sitting for 5 days. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." He threw it out. She didn't call on Tuesday. She didn't call on Wednesday. Thursday morning, he was in the middle of the bread rotation, 4:50 in the morning. The bakery dark outside the windows and the interior lit with the particular warm gold of the ovens when his phone buzzed on the counter. A text. Not a call. I got your voicemail. I've listened to it 3 times. I'm not ready to talk on the phone yet. Can I come in Saturday morning? He looked at the text in the oven glow of the early morning. He typed, "Yes, I'll be here." She sent back nothing else, and he sent back nothing else. And he put the phone down and checked the bread, and the bread was fine. And outside, the first gray suggestion of dawn was starting at the edge of the dark. Saturday morning. He was in the bakery by 4 as usual, but the Saturday morning energy was different. There was a specific quality to the air that he recognized as the feeling of something about to be decided, the feeling before a thing that matters. Lily was with Mrs. Park. He'd asked her if she could take Lily for the morning, giving no explanation, and Mrs. Park, who had been watching Nathan's life at close range for 6 years and was approximately as perceptive as a seismograph, had said of course and hadn't asked any questions. He made the bread. He made the cardamom pear Danish, which was in season, and which he made carefully, spending more time on the lamination than usual, getting the layers right. He made the ginger molasses cookies because they were his father's recipe, and his father's recipes made him feel more like himself. He set up the cafe section and ran the espresso machine through its checks and wiped down the surfaces and then ran out of things to prepare and stood behind the counter and waited. She arrived at 9:15. Because of course she did. Some things stay true even when everything around them is in question. She came in and the bell rang and she stood in the entrance for a moment the way she'd stood the first time, giving the place a chance to be what she hoped it was. And Nathan was behind the counter and they looked at each other across the room. She looked tired. Not the corporate schedule tired he'd seen in January, the kind that lived in the pace. This was a different kind, the kind that lives in the chest. She was wearing something simple, dark jeans and a jacket. Her hair not pulled back the way it usually was, just down, and the overall effect was of someone who had arrived without her usual architecture. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. She came to the counter. He'd already set the Danish and the coffee there, and she looked at them and something moved across her face that he couldn't fully read. "Can we go to the back?" she said. "Yeah," he said, "of course." He came around the counter and Delia appeared from nowhere, with the specific invisibility she deployed when she wanted to be useful without being present, and Nathan and Victoria went through the swinging door into the back room. The high window was letting in the June morning. The pencil marks were on the wall. The table was the same table, the chairs the same chairs, and the room had the particular smell of his father's bakery, flour, warmth, the ghost of every batch ever made there. And Nathan had lived his whole life in that smell and had never been as aware of it as he was right now. They sat down. Victoria put her hands around her coffee cup the way she always did, both hands, and looked at it for a moment. "Your voicemail," she said. "Yeah. You said you figured out what you're afraid of." "I did." "Tell me." He'd spent 4 days working up to this, which you might think would make it easier. It didn't. Nothing about saying the actual true thing is ever easier for the preparation. The preparation just means you do it anyway instead of retreating. "I don't believe I'm enough for you," he said. "That's the bottom of it, the real one. Not your world versus my world. That's real, but it's not the core. The core is that I look at who you are and what you've built and what you're capable of, and I can't fully believe that I'm the person you'd choose if you were choosing without some kind of, I don't know, novelty, contrast, something that wears off." She was listening with her hand still around the coffee cup. She didn't interrupt. "And instead of saying that," he continued, "I built a whole case around the logic of it, the gap in our worlds, the sustainability questions, my mother's concerns, the journalists, what Marcus said. I organized all of that into a file and called it wisdom, and it wasn't wisdom." He looked at her. "It was me constructing a reason to leave before you could." The room was quiet. "Because if I left first," he said, "I'd be in control of it. The loss would be on my terms." He paused. "That's what I was doing." Victoria looked at the table for a moment. When she looked up, her eyes were doing something that he didn't often see from her, the shimmer of something restrained. "Okay," she said. "My turn." "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do. Because you just did something very hard and you're not the only one who has a version of this." She took a breath. "I'm worth approximately $3.4 billion. I have been in rooms where world leaders asked for my opinion. I have built things, actual things, things that exist, from nothing but capital and strategy and work. And I can walk into almost any room in any city, and the room reorganizes itself around me. She paused. And I have been terrified for the last 6 months that you would find out. He looked at her. Find out what? That none of it makes me feel like anything. She said it plainly, without performance. That I have been exhausted and alone in a way that doesn't respond to money or success or the room reorganizing itself, and it hasn't responded to those things for years, and I'd accepted that as the cost of the life I chose. She looked at the high window, and then Marcus had appendicitis on a Thursday, and his brother showed up to apologize, and his brother was… She stopped. His brother was what? She looked at him. You looked at the menu for 10 minutes and then ordered a chicken that was too much chicken for you, and you apologized on behalf of someone you barely had to apologize for, and when I asked if you liked your bakery, you didn't say it's challenging but rewarding, or I have plans to scale, you said most days. And that was the most honest answer anyone had given me in years. She paused. And I have been afraid since then that I want this too much, that I've wanted it so much that I've made it into something you didn't sign up for, that I've put weight on this place and on you that you couldn't see and wouldn't choose if you fully understood it. What kind of weight? He asked. The kind where I realize I have been lonelier than I knew, she said quietly. And you were the first thing in a long time that made that stop being true. And that is a lot to put on a person. On a bakery. She almost smiled, but it was a fragile one. I know what this place is to you. I know it's your father's and your history and Lily's Saturday mornings and the regulars and the recipe cards. And I walked in here and it started to feel like mine too. And I should have been more careful about that, because wanting something to be yours doesn't make it yours. He leaned forward. Victoria. She looked at him. I want it to be yours, he said. That's the problem. That's the whole problem. I wanted to be yours, and I got scared of how much I wanted that, and He stopped, tried again. The back room, the hot chocolate, Lily telling you to add more cinnamon, you asking Hector about football announcers. He shook his head. I was happy. That's what scared me. I was actually happy, and I couldn't figure out how to protect it, so I started protecting myself from it instead. She pressed her lips together. I'm sorry, he said. I should have said that first. I'm sorry for the weeks of distance and the unanswered texts and for hearing what Marcus said and using it as an excuse to disappear instead of coming to you. You deserve better than that. You were scared, she said. That's not an excuse. No, she agreed. But it's a reason. There's a difference. The morning light through the high window moved slightly as a cloud passed outside. The room shifted, settled. Can I ask you something? Nathan said. Yes? The Maplewood deal. Marcus told me you pulled it. I did. Why? She was quiet for a moment. Because it had become complicated in a way that it shouldn't be. A business decision shouldn't be complicated by whether the person across from me thinks I'm here for the business. She paused. And also because… She stopped, and the pause had a different quality. Because I realized I didn't care about it. The corridor, the project, the numbers. I'd been running the analysis on it for 18 months, and when it became the thing that was between us, I just… She shrugged slightly, one shoulder. I didn't want it anymore. You lost an 18-month deal. I've lost bigger deals. I've never lost… She stopped. Say it, he said quietly. She looked at him directly. I've never lost something that mattered like this matters. The words settled in the quiet between them. Nathan reached across the table. He put his hand over hers, over the hands wrapped around the coffee cup, and she turned one hand over and held his, and neither of them said anything for a moment because the thing that needed to be said had been said, and the rest of it could wait. I'm afraid too, she said, finally, in case that wasn't clear. What are you afraid of? That I'm too much, she said, that the life that comes with me is too much, that you look at the black car and the schedule and Singapore and the board meetings, and you decide eventually that it's not. She paused. That I'm not worth the complexity. Victoria, he said, and her name had a weight in his mouth. I sat across from you at a restaurant I couldn't afford for a dinner I wasn't supposed to be at, and I thought you were the most interesting person I'd ever met. I thought that before I knew anything." He paused. "The complexity is part of you. I'm not interested in a version of you without it." She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face shifted. Not broke, not dissolved, but loosened, like something she'd been holding carefully in both hands for a very long time. "Okay," she said. And then, "I want to try. Actually try. Not Tuesdays and careful conversations and managing the distance. Actually try." "Me too," he said. "I don't know exactly what that looks like," she said. "My life is complicated. I know. It will require, I know. You keep saying I know before I finish." "Because I do know," he said. "I've been watching your life for 6 months. I know what it looks like. I know what the schedule looks like and the calls and the cities, and I'm not asking you to give any of that up." He looked at her steadily. "I'm asking you to let me be part of it, the actual part, not the Tuesday morning part, all of it." She was quiet. "And you come to Saturday mornings," he said, "and you help Lily ruin the cinnamon rolls, and you eat soup in the back room when it's cold. And when I'm scared, I say so instead of building a case and disappearing." He paused. "And when you're scared, you say so too, before you pull an 18-month deal." The corner of her mouth moved. "The deal was a separate, Victoria." Yes. "Okay, I'll say so first." He kept his hand over hers. The morning had moved. It was later now, closer to 10, and the bakery sounds from the other side of the door were the sounds of a Saturday in full swing. Life doing what it did. "There's something else," she said. "Okay. I've been talking to Petra, the COO candidate, and she's agreed to come on board. She starts in August, which means my day-to-day operational load drops by approximately 40%. She said this in the tone of someone reporting a fact, but the fact had a weight that she was choosing to let him feel. Which means I'll be here more. Not every Tuesday. More than Tuesdays." He looked at her. "More than Tuesdays," he said. "If that's—" "Yes," he said. "Obviously, yes." She laughed then. The real one. The one that used the muscles around her eyes. And it was the first time he'd heard it in 2 weeks, and it landed in his chest like something returning. "I should probably tell you something too," he said. "What?" "The cafe section officially opened last week. Soft opening, no announcement, just—" He paused. "It's good. The numbers from the first week were better than the projection, not by a huge margin, but by enough." She stared at him. "Nathan, that's— I know. You've been carrying that for a week and not telling me? I wanted to tell you in person. I was going to— and then the whole thing happened." She shook her head slowly. "You are the most—" She stopped. "We are a pair. Do you know that? You sitting on good news and me sitting on real estate deals, both of us drowning in things we should have just said out loud." "We're bad at this," he agreed. "We're very bad at this. We'll get better." "We will get better," she said, with the tone of someone making a decision rather than a wish. They sat there for a while longer, finishing the coffee, not rushing, and then Nathan said he had to go get Lily from Mrs. Park, and Victoria said she'd come with him if that was okay. And it was okay, it was more than okay, it was the specific kind of okay that felt like returning to somewhere you'd been afraid you'd never get back to. They went through the bakery together, and Delia looked up from behind the counter and took in the specific quality of how they were standing relative to each other and said absolutely nothing, which from Delia was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Outside, it was June. Real June. Warm and full. The kind of morning the city does when it's decided to be beautiful. They walked the 2 blocks to Mrs. Park's, not touching, not because there was distance between them, but because they were both still recalibrating, still finding the shape of the thing after having been afraid they'd broken it beyond finding. Mrs. Park opened the door and Lily appeared behind her with the speed of a person who had been waiting, and she took in the 2 of them standing on the doorstep with the assessment of someone who understood more than she let on. "Victoria," Lily said. "You're here." "I'm here," Victoria said. Lily looked at her father, then back at Victoria. Then she grabbed her backpack from inside the door and came down the steps with the air of someone for whom this was already resolved. "Can we go to the bakery?" she said. "I want to make something." "What do you want to make?" Nathan asked. Lily considered, walking between them down the sidewalk, hands in her pockets. "I want to make the apple galette," she said. "I found Grandpa's card for it in the drawer." Nathan stopped walking. "You found the card?" he said. "It was in the drawer with the recipe stuff, the one with the flour on it." Lily looked up at him. "Is that okay? Can we make it?" He looked at his daughter, at the card she'd found, his father's handwriting on it, the recipe that had started everything, that had started the bakery, that had started the Tuesdays, that had started all of it. "Yeah," he said, "we can make it." "What's the apple galette?" Victoria asked. "He'll tell you," Lily said, with the authority of someone who has already been told the story and considers it settled. "It's a good one." They walked back to the bakery. Nathan unlocked the door and they went in through the front, into the morning smell of the place. And Lily went immediately behind the counter and started pulling out bowls with the confidence of someone who lived there, which, in a way, she did. Nathan found the card in the back. His father's handwriting, the flour stains, the crossed-out measurements and margin notes in different pens that represented 20 years of iteration. He brought it out and set it on the counter. Victoria looked at it without touching it. "Dolores," she said quietly. "Dolores," he said. He never got it right for her. He got it right eventually. She looked at the card. "The long tail," she said. "The long tail," he agreed. Lily appeared between them, looking at the card with her hands on the counter, comparing the ingredients list against what she could see in the supply cabinet. "We need more butter," she announced. "We have butter," Nathan said. "More than that." "Lily, the recipe says cold butter, and there's only warm butter in the front, and cold butter is different. You said so yourself." Nathan looked at Victoria over Lily's head. Victoria was pressing her lips together again, which meant she was on Lily's side and was choosing not to announce it directly. "The cold butter is in the back," Nathan said. "I'll get it." He went into the back. From the front room, he could hear Victoria asking Lily what the difference between cold butter and warm butter was in a galette, and Lily explaining, with the particular mix of confidence and half-knowledge that was her signature, something about the layers and the way the cold pieces created steam, and that was what made it flaky and not just solid. "Where did you learn that?" Victoria asked. "Dad says it. He says it every time he makes anything with pastry." "Does he say it to you specifically or just out loud?" "Both. He talks to the bread a lot." "Does the bread answer?" "Obviously not," Lily said, with the patience of someone who has considered this. "But he thinks it helps with the process, like how you're not supposed to watch it rise." Nathan came back with the cold butter and set it on the counter and stood there for a second looking at the two of them, his daughter and this woman, side by side at his father's counter with his father's recipe card between them. The morning coming through the windows, the bakery doing what it always did, being what it always was. He thought about his father in Florida, making the galette every fall for his mother, finally right after all the years of iteration. He thought about Dolores and the turkey club, and the thing she'd asked for that she never got to taste. He thought about how everything had a long tail, how a Thursday dinner that wasn't supposed to happen had led here, to this specific Saturday morning, in this specific room, with the butter cold and the recipe card on the counter, and Lily explaining pastry physics to a billionaire who was listening like the answer mattered. He thought about the piece of paper in the drawer. "I don't believe I'm enough for her." He'd written it and sat with it and learned something from it. But sitting here, now, in this room, he thought he understood something the piece of paper hadn't been able to tell him. The question wasn't whether he was enough. The question was whether he was going to show up. Whether he was going to be present, actually present, in the thing that was happening instead of spending his energy bracing for it to end. He'd been bracing for it to end since September. He was done bracing. "Okay," he said, setting the butter down with a decisiveness that made Lily look up. "Cold butter. What else does the card say we need?" Lily read the ingredients in her clear, precise voice, the voice she used for math, for things that had right answers, and Victoria started pulling bowls down from the shelf, finding them without being told where they were because she'd been here enough times that she knew, and Nathan started measuring flour onto the scale. The galette they made that morning was imperfect. Lily had opinions about the apple arrangement that were implemented over Nathan's moderate objections. The pastry crust was slightly thicker at one end than the other. The sugar distribution was uneven in a way that became visible in the oven. When it came out, Lily leaned over it with the assessment of a judge. "It's crooked," she said. "A little," Nathan agreed. "It smells right." "It smells exactly right." Lily cut the first slice with the ceremonial seriousness of someone who understood the weight of the moment, and Nathan plated it, and they each took a piece, and the bakery was warm and smelled of apples and butter and caramelized sugar, and outside the June morning was doing everything June mornings do. Victoria took the first bite. She was quiet for a moment. "What do you think?" Nathan asked. She looked at him. The measured expression was entirely gone, not replaced by something soft or performed, just gone. And underneath it was something real and present and not particularly concerned with protecting itself. "I think," she said, "that your father finally got it right." Lily, who had been watching this exchange with close attention, turned to Nathan with the expression she deployed when something important had been confirmed. "She's right," Lily said. "About everything." Nathan looked at Victoria across the counter. "Yeah," he said. "She is." The morning held its shape around them. The three of them in the bakery with the crooked galette and the flour-stained recipe card and the cold June light through the old windows. And it was not perfect. None of it was perfect, but it was real and warm, and it was theirs. Nathan did not think about the ledger once. The crooked galette became a Saturday tradition. Not every Saturday. Sometimes Nathan had early deliveries, sometimes Lily had soccer, sometimes life simply refused to arrange itself around anyone's preferences, but most Saturdays through that June and into July, the three of them ended up in the bakery with the flour-stained recipe card and whatever modifications Lily had decided to introduce that week. The apple filling became apple pear, then apple pear ginger. Then there was the ill-advised apple pear ginger cardamom experiment that Lily defended until the last bite, and Nathan maintained was an overreach. And Victoria, who was not going to win any argument against a now 8-year-old on the subject of cardamom, said diplomatically that it was interesting, and that interesting was different from wrong. "Interesting is what people say when they don't want to say bad," Lily said. "Interesting is what people say when they need more data," Victoria said. "Make it again. Adjust the cardamom down by half. Then we'll have data." Lily considered this with the gravity she applied to experimental problems. "Okay," she said, "but I'm not going down more than half." "Half," Victoria agreed. Nathan stood at the back counter watching the negotiation and thought that there was something quietly extraordinary about the fact that his daughter and this woman had found each other's wavelength so completely and so naturally, the way certain people do. Not because they're similar exactly, but because they both take things seriously in the same key. July moved. The way July moves in the city, thick and hot, the bakery running the commercial fans at full speed by 8 in the morning, the regulars gravitating toward the iced coffee that Nathan had added to the cafe menu after several weeks of fielding what Delia called the petition, which was really just Mr. Okafor saying pointedly every day that his croissant would be improved by something cold to drink. The cafe section was not a revolution. It was not the thing that made Nathan Carter wealthy or turned Carter's bakery into something that warranted a feature story. What it was steady. It added 30% to the morning revenue, which was the number Nathan had projected when he'd been rearranging the spreadsheet at midnight. And it did this without changing what the place was, which was the thing he'd been most afraid of. The new tables filled with the same kind of people who'd always come. Not a hipper demographic or a more lucrative one, just people who wanted somewhere to sit and something that tasted like it had been made by a person rather than a process. He'd been worried the expansion would dilute the bakery. Instead, it just made more room. He understood, somewhere in that realization, that this had been the right lesson at the right time. Victoria was good at not fixing things that weren't broken. This was something Nathan came to appreciate with increasing depth as the summer went on. Because he'd half expected, not consciously, not as a specific fear, just as a background awareness, that having someone with her resources and her particular intelligence involved in his life would mean having his life improved in ways he hadn't asked for. She would know better. She would see efficiencies. She would, gently or directly, start reordering things. She didn't. She had opinions. She always had opinions, and she didn't soften them, which was one of the things he'd liked about her from the beginning. But she offered them when asked, and she understood the difference between being asked and not being asked. She helped him once with a supplier negotiation that had been going sideways, not by taking it over, but by sitting across from him with the contract and walking him through what the terms actually meant versus what he'd been reading into them. And afterward, he'd gone back to the supplier and renegotiated 2 clauses and saved himself 6 months of a bad arrangement. She was useful the way a good partner is useful, not by making your problems disappear, but by making you better equipped to handle them yourself. He told her that once, in August, sitting on the steps outside the bakery after close, both of them with coffee going cold. "That's the thing I was always afraid of," he said, "that you'd come in and make it better in a way that made it yours instead of mine." "I know," she said. "Did you know that was what I was afraid of?" "I suspected. That's why I didn't." She looked at the street. "I've seen what happens when people with money think they're helping. They help so thoroughly that there's nothing left of what was there." She paused. "Your bakery doesn't need my help. It needs flour and time and the fact that you care too much about burned corners. Delia says the same thing about the burned corners. Delia is right. Everyone is always right except me." "That's not true," she said. "You were right about the backroom soup. You were right about leaving the chalkboard handwritten instead of getting a printed menu. You were right about—" She stopped. "You were right about all of it, about every decision you've made here." She looked at him. "You just don't trust yourself to be right because you've spent years being the only person in the room who had to be." He looked at her. "When you're the only person responsible for something," she said, "you spend so much energy being vigilant that you stop trusting your own instincts. Because if your instincts are wrong, there's no one else. The whole thing falls on you." She picked up her coffee. "That's not a bakery problem. That's a single father running a business problem." He was quiet for a moment. "Did I ever thank you," he said, "for the contractor recommendation back in winter?" "No." "I'm thanking you now. 8 months late. Better than never." She looked at him sideways. "In that particular spirit," she said, "I'm thanking you now for the back room, for the soup, for not making me feel like a guest in a place I wanted to belong to." She paused. "That took something from you." "I know it did." "Not as much as it should have," he said honestly. "No," she agreed. "But you did it anyway. That counts." Petra joined VL Development in August, as planned. Nathan met her once, briefly, when Victoria brought her to the bakery on a Thursday morning. Not as a strategic introduction, more the way you bring someone to a place you like when you want to share it. Petra was 40, precise, with the manner of someone who ran meetings like they had weight limits and was not interested in exceeding them. She shook Nathan's hand, ordered an Americano and a sourdough slice, ate it at the counter with the focused attention of someone tasting something rather than just consuming it, and said, "Good bread," in the tone of someone for whom that was a complete and sufficient review. After she left, Nathan looked at Victoria. "She seems formidable," he said. "She's the most competent person I've ever hired," Victoria said, which is saying something. "You seem relieved." "I am relieved." She said it simply, without the usual buffer. "I've been running on reserves for 2 years. Having someone I actually trust with the operational side." She paused. "It's like being able to breathe again." He watched her say that. The way the tension in her jaw released slightly, as though saying it out loud completed the relief. "You don't have to perform being okay around me," he said, in case that wasn't clear. She looked at him. "I know. You still do it sometimes." "I know that too." A pause. "I've been performing being okay for a long time. It's residual. I'm working on it." "I know," he said. "I can tell." She reached across the counter and touched the back of his hand briefly, the way people touch something to confirm it's real. "You're annoyingly perceptive," she said. "Delia says I care too much about things. Delia is right about most things. She would agree with you vigorously. Victoria picked up her coffee. I like Delia. Delia likes you. She held a Danish every Tuesday for 3 months before I knew she was doing it. I know, Victoria said. She told me in April. Nathan stared at her. She told you? We have conversations when you're in the back. About what? About you, mostly. She looked entirely unrepentant. And about the neighborhood. And about a recipe she's been trying to work out for an olive rosemary loaf. And about whether Mr. Okafor has actually been to Paris or is making it up. What's the consensus on the Paris question? She thinks he went once, 20 years ago, and has been dining out on it ever since. Nathan absorbed this. That tracks, he said. The fall came the way fall comes in the Northeast, suddenly, decisively, the city agreeing collectively one morning that summer was over and the rules had changed. Nathan's father called on a Thursday in September, and Nathan answered in the bakery office, standing at the desk, and his father's voice on the phone had the particular warm quality it got when he was calling about something he'd been thinking about for a while. Marcus tells me things are good, his father said. Marcus tells everyone things. He says you're happy. Nathan looked at the recipe card in the drawer. The galette card, flour-stained and marked up, which he'd moved to the desk because he'd been using it regularly and the drawer was inconvenient. Yeah, he said. I think so. You think so? I am, he said. I am happy. Good. His father was quiet for a moment. She sounds, from what Marcus says, come visit, Nathan said. Don't build a picture from Marcus. Come visit and meet her. A pause. Your mother would like that. Bring Mom. Come for Thanksgiving. Stay the week. The expansion has the extra seating now, and I've been wanting to try the holiday menu. You're doing a holiday menu? Victoria suggested it. I've been working on it. Another pause. This one had a different texture. Victoria suggested it. Don't read into it. I'm not reading into anything. I'm just... His father stopped, and when he spoke again, he had the voice of someone choosing his words with care. I was hard on you when you were young, Nathan. About the bakery, about stepping up. I know I was. Dad, I put a lot on you, too much, too fast, and I've watched you carry it, and I've been... A pause. I'm proud of you. I don't say that enough. I want you to know it. Nathan sat with this for a moment. I know, he said. I know you are. And this woman, whoever she is, if she makes you happy, that's enough for your mother and me. That's all we needed to know. He hung up and sat in the office for a while and looked at the recipe card and thought about his father in Florida making the galette every fall, finally right after all the years it wasn't, and how some things take the time they take and there's no shortcutting the iteration. His parents came for Thanksgiving. His mother, Eleanor, who had been the one to voice the fear that a woman like Victoria would eventually return to her real life, arrived at the bakery on a Tuesday afternoon in late November and stood in the entrance and looked around with the expression of someone who is measuring a place against the idea of it they'd built. Victoria was there. She was at the back counter with Lily, the two of them in the middle of something that involved significant flour and a disagreement about whether the dough needed more time. Nathan introduced them with the slightly held breath of a man who understands that this particular introduction carries weight in multiple directions. His mother looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at his mother. I've heard a lot about you, Victoria said, and there was a quality to the directness that his mother, who had little patience for social softening, recognized immediately. Some of it from me, Eleanor said, and not all of it was kind. I want you to know that. Nathan told me, Victoria said. I understood it. Did you? You were protecting him. That's a reasonable thing to do. A pause. I'd have done the same. Eleanor looked at her for another moment. Then she turned to Lily, who had been watching this exchange with the close attention she gave to things she considered important. You must be Lily, Eleanor said. I'm Lily, Lily confirmed. We're making bread. Do you want to help? Eleanor Carter looked at the flour on the counter and the enormous apron and the dough waiting in the bowl. She had not made bread in 30 years. She had run a household and raised 2 sons and managed the books of a sandwich shop and done 100 practical things, and somewhere along the way, the making of actual bread had been one of the things that fell away. "Yes," she said, "I think I do." Nathan's father, Robert, who arrived an hour later having spent the interim walking the neighborhood to get a sense of it, walked into the bakery and went directly to the display case and stood in front of it for a long time with his hands behind his back, the way he always had when he was assessing something. Then he turned around. He looked at the cafe section. He looked at the chalkboard menu. He looked at the expansion space and the new window and the tables and the espresso machine. And then he looked at Nathan, and his expression was the one Nathan recognized from childhood, the one his father wore when something had exceeded his private estimate. "You kept the floors," his father said. "Always keeping the floors." "The flour supplier?" "Same one." His father nodded. He walked to the back counter and put his hand on it, the way you put your hand on something you built a long time ago and want to confirm is still solid. "It's better," his father said. "It's better than when I had it." "I had more time to work on it," Nathan said. "No," his father said. "You had more belief in it. That's different." He looked at his son. "You made it yours." The Thanksgiving they had that year was not elegant. Eleanor Carter commandeered the bakery kitchen on Thursday morning and produced a quantity of food that significantly exceeded the available serving dishes, which meant some things were served in mixing bowls and nobody minded. Marcus arrived with a woman named Kara he'd been seeing for 3 months and hadn't mentioned to anyone until that morning, which caused a level of family discussion that lasted through appetizers. Mr. Okafor appeared at the bakery door at noon because he'd smelled something from the street, and Nathan let him in, and he stayed for 3 hours and told Robert about Paris in enough detail that Robert, who had never been, felt by the end that he had also been. Victoria sat in the middle of all of this with the expression of someone who had been handed something they'd stopped believing was available and were trying to figure out how to receive it without breaking it. Nathan watched her at the table, talking to his father about the history of the building, laughing at something Marcus said, cutting Lily's turkey when Lily declared it too complicated. And he thought about what she'd told him in the back room. "I have never felt as at home as I do here." He hadn't doubted it in the moment. He understood it now in a different way, with the specific understanding that comes from watching someone exist in a space rather than just hearing them describe it. She wasn't performing comfort. She was comfortable. The distinction was visible in 100 small things, the way she reached for the breadbasket without asking, the way she laughed at his mother's story about Marcus's childhood without the brief calibration that usually preceded her laughter in unfamiliar company. After dinner, when the kitchen was loud with the particular chaos of 10 people and 2 mixing bowls of leftover stuffing, Nathan and Victoria ended up on the steps outside the bakery, the same steps where they'd sat in August with the coffee going cold, because the kitchen had reached capacity and they both needed 10 minutes of quiet. It was cold. Real cold now, the November kind. She leaned against his shoulder without making a production of it, and he put his arm around her without making a production of it, and they sat on the steps of the bakery in the cold with the light coming through the window behind them. "Your mother approves," Victoria said. "How do you know?" "She told me while we were making bread that you're stubborn and don't know how to ask for things, and that I'd have to be patient with you." She said that. She said it with affection. Mostly. "I'm not that stubborn." Victoria looked at him. "I'm somewhat stubborn," he said. "She also said—" Victoria paused. "She said you spent 2 years after Lily's mother left not believing you deserved a second try, and that it broke her heart to watch." She was quiet for a moment. "And that she was wrong about me. She said to tell you that." Nathan looked at the street. "She didn't have to say that," he said. "No," Victoria agreed. "She chose to." He thought about his mother on the phone in April, worried, saying these people don't live the way we live, and not wrong, not unkind, just scared for him. And now she was in his kitchen, having made too much food and told a woman she'd been afraid of that she'd been wrong. The capacity to change your mind, he thought, was one of the underrated forms of courage. "What are you thinking?" Victoria asked. "That my family is a lot," he said. "Yes," she agreed with warmth. "It's exactly the right amount of a lot." He looked at her. "You mean that?" "I mean everything I say to you," she said. "I've gotten better about that." Saying the things I mean. You've always been direct. Direct isn't the same as honest, she said. You can be very direct about the things that don't cost you anything and very careful about the things that do. She paused. I was honest with you in the back room, in June. That was different from direct. I know, he said. I know it was. I want to keep doing that, she said. The honest part. Me too. She looked at the street, which was empty and cold and lit by the particular orange of winter streetlights. Nathan. Yeah. I love you. She said it quietly, not as a declaration, not with the weight that sentences like that sometimes carry when they've been held too long. She said it the way she'd said, I'm not going anywhere to Marcus, like a fact, like something she'd already worked out and was simply now reporting. I've been waiting for the right moment, and I've decided there isn't one, and I should just say it. He turned and looked at her. Her face was half in shadow from the streetlight, and she was watching him with the steadiness that he'd recognized from the first night. The quality of someone who reads rooms, who had read this room, and had decided to say the true thing anyway. I love you too, he said. And it came out without the effort he'd half expected, without the fear. It just came out. Because it was true, and had been true, and the only thing that had ever been in the way of saying it was him. She exhaled, a small, specific exhale that was not dramatic, but was real. The release of something held. Good, she said. That would have been embarrassing otherwise. He laughed, and she laughed, and from inside the bakery came the sound of Marcus saying something that made everyone else protest at once, and Lily's voice cutting through it all with the clarity of someone who had the correct answer and was prepared to deliver it. They went back inside. The winter that followed was the year's best-kept promise. Petra's arrival at VL Development did what it had been designed to do. Victoria's schedule didn't simplify exactly, because her schedule was not the kind that simplified, but it became more navigable, more hers to manage rather than something that managed her. She still traveled. She still had the calls and the board meetings and the decisions that lived in the part of her world Nathan didn't fully enter. But she was in the city more. And when she was in the city, she was present in a way she hadn't been able to be before, without the ambient frequency of 15 things waiting. She started coming to the bakery on Saturday mornings as a matter of course, not as a special occasion. She and Lily had developed a standing arrangement about the cinnamon rolls that Nathan had stopped trying to influence, understanding that the two of them had reached a consensus that did not require his input. The rolls continued to be excessive. The customers continued to buy them faster than anything else on the counter, which Nathan found difficult to process but accepted as data. He started going to events with her. Not all of them. He drew a line at the ones that were purely performative, the ones that existed to be seen at rather than to accomplish anything. And Victoria drew the same line and they drew it together, which was easier than drawing it alone. But some of them, the ones that mattered to her professionally, the ones where being there was something she'd asked for, he went. He put on the suit that fit well in the shoulders and less well everywhere else. And once she took him to a tailor who fixed the everywhere else problem and said nothing about it being something she'd arranged, just mentioned that she knew someone if he was interested, and he was interested. He was aware, at those events, of being looked at in a particular way, the assessment people do when they're trying to classify you relative to the person you're with. He was also aware that this was going to happen for as long as this was a thing, and that the discomfort of it was finite and manageable, and was not, ultimately, the most important thing about any given evening. He met people at those events who were interesting and some who were not, and he talked to all of them the way he talked to everyone, which was the way his father had always talked to people, like the conversation was the point and not the resume attached to it. Victoria noticed this and told him once that he had a gift for making people feel like themselves at parties, which he hadn't known was a skill he had, but which, once named, he recognized in himself. Is that useful at your events? He asked. It's the most useful thing at my events, she said. Everyone there is performing. You're not. It throws people off in a good way. I'm not performing because I don't know enough to perform correctly, he said. That's exactly why it works, she said. He thought about that for a while. The idea that not belonging to a world sometimes made you more effective in it than the people who did, because you weren't playing by the rules that everyone else was performing around. He never stopped being aware of the gap between their worlds. He was realistic enough to understand that the gap was real. It existed in money and history and the particular social geography of the city, and that pretending otherwise would be its own kind of dishonesty. But he stopped treating the gap as a verdict. It was a fact, like the floors being original hardwood and the winter being cold, a fact you worked with rather than against. Victoria, for her part, stopped performing invulnerability around him with any regularity. It happened still. Habits that are that old and that functional don't disappear completely. But when it happened, he recognized it now, and she usually recognized it herself within a few minutes, and they developed a shorthand for it that involved very little ceremony. He'd say, "Where are you right now?" and she'd tell him, and that was usually enough. She told him in January that she'd turned down a board seat on a company she'd been courting for 2 years because accepting it would have added 15 hours a week to her travel schedule, and she'd decided the travel schedule was not something she was willing to expand right now. "Is that purely a strategy decision, or partly something else?" he asked. "Partly something else," she said, without hedging. "That's a significant thing to turn down." "I know what I want more," she said. "That's a new experience for me. I'm treating it with appropriate respect." He looked at her across the bakery counter. "You know," he said, "my father would have liked you." "Would have?" She looked up. "He met me at Thanksgiving. I mean," he paused. "He would have liked you in the way he likes very few people. The way he liked Dolores." He searched for how to explain it. He respected people who knew what they wanted and went after it without excuses. He always said that was rarer than people thought. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Dolores wanted an apple galette," she said. "She did. And look where that got everyone, but..." He laughed. "Long tail," he said. "Very long tail," she agreed. The proposal, when it came, was not planned in the way that proposals are typically planned. There was no restaurant reservation, no coordinated moment, no ring waiting in a pocket for weeks, which was probably right, which was probably the only way it could have been right for them. It was a Thursday evening in March, almost exactly a year and a half after that first dinner at Alara. The bakery was closed. Nathan had stayed late doing the ordering for the following week. He still did this himself, still sat at the back desk with the inventory sheet and the supplier lists, because it was the part of the operation he trusted only to himself. Victoria had come by after her last call of the day, which had ended at 7:15, and she'd let herself in with the key she had because she had a key, which had happened gradually enough that neither of them had marked the exact moment it became the norm. She brought food. This was also a pattern. She brought things from a restaurant she'd passed, or whatever was in her bag, or once famously a paper sack of gas station snacks during a stretch when she'd had no time for anything else. And Nathan would find something in the bakery kitchen to supplement it, and they'd eat at the back table with whatever was left of the day between them. That evening, she'd brought soup from a place 2 streets over, the good kind, thick and serious, the kind that understood winter. And Nathan had found half a sourdough that was a day old but held up fine. And they were at the back table in the quiet of the closed bakery, with the lights low and the sounds of the street coming through the walls at the particular muffled frequency of a city night. They talked about his week, the ordering, a flour supplier issue he'd been navigating, a new hire he was considering for the cafe section. They talked about hers, a meeting that had gone long, something Petra had flagged about a Portland acquisition that was turning complicated, a conversation she'd had with her own mother that had been strained in the specific way their conversations sometimes were. At some point the soup was finished and neither of them had moved, and the bakery was its particular quiet self around them. The smell of the day in the walls, the warmth of the ovens that had been off for hours, but still held something, the hardwood floors that carried 60 years of footsteps, including his and now hers. Nathan reached into his apron pocket. He was still wearing his apron, had forgotten to take it off, and found a ring, which was the part that required some explanation. He'd bought it 3 weeks ago. Not in a jewelry store, in a small shop 2 neighborhoods over that sold estate pieces, the kind of shop you found when you weren't looking for it, the kind that had things in cases that had histories attached. The ring was simple, a thin band, a small oval stone the color of deep water that was either blue or green depending on the light. which had reminded him of the blouse she'd been wearing the night they met. He'd bought it on an impulse that felt more like recognition than impulse, and he'd carried it in various pockets since then, not waiting for a moment exactly, not planning, just carrying it the way you carry something you know is right and are waiting to know when. He knew when. He put it on the table between them. Victoria looked at it. The bakery was quiet around them. Outside, a car passed. The old refrigerator unit in the corner made its familiar small sound. "I've been carrying that around for 3 weeks," he said. "I kept waiting for the right moment, and then I remembered someone telling me there isn't one, and you should just say the thing." She looked up from the ring. "I'm not good at speeches," he said. "You know that. I'm good at bread, and I'm decent at soup, and I'm getting better at asking for things. I love you. I love that you tell me when the cardamom ratio is wrong. I love that you negotiated the cinnamon content with my daughter for 3 months and eventually compromised. I love that you pulled a real estate deal because you didn't want it between us. I love that you showed up every Tuesday for 6 months when I was too scared to understand what it meant." He looked at her directly. "I love your life. I love the complicated, traveling, board meeting, 4 cities in 4 days parts of it. I'm not asking you to make it smaller. I'm asking you to let me be in it." She was looking at him with the expression he'd seen in the back room in June, the one underneath the measured one, the one that wasn't protecting itself. "I have a drawer," she said. Her voice was steady, but something in it wasn't. "In my apartment. I keep things in it that matter to me. The first Forbes profile because my mother framed it even though we were barely speaking then and it felt like something. A letter from my first investor. A photo of the first building I ever developed." She paused. "I put the paper wrapper from the first cardamom pear Danish in that drawer. In October." Nathan looked at her. "I put it in there," she said, "because I knew then. I was sitting at the window table and I ate the Danish, and I knew that whatever this was, it was the most important thing happening in my life, and I needed to mark it somehow." She looked at the ring on the table. "I've known for a long time, Nathan." "Is that a yes?" he asked. "That's a yes," she said. He picked up the ring and put it on her hand, and it fit, which was either luck or something he refused to examine too closely, and she looked at it on her finger with an expression that was not the expression of someone who had gotten the thing she expected. It was the expression of someone who had gotten the thing they'd given up hoping for and hadn't known they'd given up hoping for until it was there. She looked up. "The stone is the color of the blouse you wore at Alara," he said. She stared at him. "You remembered that." "I remember everything about that dinner. I remember the blouse and the way you stabbed the pasta and the exact moment you said you're right, and I realized you weren't going to redirect it." He paused. "I knew something then, too. I just needed a 1.5 years to be brave enough to admit it." She reached across the table and put her hand on the side of his face, not dramatically, just quietly, the gesture of someone touching something they intend to keep. "We're going to be terrible at some of this," she said. "We're already terrible at some of this. We're going to disagree about things, constantly. Your mother's going to give me advice I haven't asked for. Guaranteed. Lily is going to continue to be right about the cinnamon, indefinitely. And you're going to be scared sometimes," she said. "And so am I." "And we'll say so," he said. "First, before we build the case." She nodded. "Before we build the case." Outside, the March night was doing the thing March nights do when they're deciding whether to stay winter or become something else, hovering in the uncertainty of it, neither cold enough to commit nor warm enough to resolve. The street was ordinary. The neighborhood was ordinary. The bakery smelled of everything it always smelled of. In the morning, Nathan would open at 5:30, and the regulars would come, and Mr. Okafor would order his croissant and compare it unfavorably to Paris, and the construction workers would descend on the cinnamon rolls, and the espresso machine would run its morning shift, and the flour would go where flour goes. Lily would have opinions. Delia would be right about things. Marcus would call with information that was none of his business and somehow exactly what Nathan needed to hear. And Victoria would come, not just on Tuesdays, but whenever she came, key in her pocket and a bag from somewhere she'd been, and she'd sit at the back table or the window table or behind the counter with Lily debating the cardamom, and she'd be there. Actually there. Not as a break from her life, but as part of it. The same way the bakery was part of Nathan's life, which was to say, fundamentally, without drama, in the way of things that have simply become true. This, Nathan thought, was the thing nobody told you about happiness. Not that it arrived complete. Not that it solved the things that needed solving or removed the things that were hard. Not that it made you someone different from who you'd been on the way to it. It arrived in the ordinary, in the back room and the bad hot chocolate and the crooked galette, in a woman who stabbed her pasta and said you're right without scaffolding, in a daughter who told you to say sorry fast before it gets complicated and was right, as she usually was, about the things that mattered, in the choice, made and remade, not once but daily, not in a single moment but in the accumulation of 100 small ones, to show up, to stay, to stop waiting for things to fall apart and start tending to what was actually there. His father had made an apple galette every fall for 20 years, working the recipe toward right, one iteration at a time, patient with the process. Not because he was certain it would get there, but because he believed the trying was worth the uncertainty. Nathan looked at Victoria across the back table of the bakery he'd inherited, and expanded and nearly broken and put back together. And he thought that whatever he'd been afraid of losing, he had not lost it. He'd held it badly for a while, clutched at it the way frightened people clutch things. But he hadn't lost it, and now he was going to hold it differently. With open hands, the way his father held bread, firmly enough to shape it, gently enough to let it rise. "It's cold in here," Victoria said, practical as always. "Is there coffee?" "There's always coffee," he said. "Then make coffee," she said, "and come sit with me." He made the coffee. He came and sat with her. The bakery held them the way it had always held everyone who'd needed it. Not perfectly, not softly, but solidly, with the particular warmth of walls that had known work and laughter and the particular human need for somewhere to land. Outside, March was still deciding what it wanted to be. Inside, everything had already been decided.